Hey guys, welcome back to channel. So today we going to see what if Naruto teleport in the force of evil and had secretly relationship with Hekapoo. Let's start. Chapter 1. Inside what appeared to be an ancient musty library, a flaming portal popped into existence that several individuals quickly stepped out of. The first of them was known as Hekapoo, a pale-skinned demonic-looking woman with a lax grin on her face, wearing an orange-red ball gown and had a ball of fire floating between the two yellow horns sticking out of her red hair. The second was Star Butterfly, an excited-looking blonde girl with heart marks on her cheeks, that was looking all around the room in awe. Her clothing consisted of a mixture of different colors that made her look like a walking rainbow. The next person out was Marco Diaz, a Latin American boy wearing a red hoodie who was also looking around curiously but with a guarded edge, as if expecting something to come out and attack them at any moment. After him came Tom, a chill-looking demonic teen boy with a third eye on his forehead, small horns on either side of his head, and slightly purple skin that gave him a sickly appearance. And last but certainly not least was Kelly, a dark-skinned girl with extremely long aquamarine hair held back by a pink hair tie, wearing a white-pink striped shirt and hefting a huge broadsword like it was a toothpick. "So, this is the super amazing place you wanted to show us, Lady Hekapoo?" Star asked as the group finished taking in their surroundings. "Yep. Welcome to the Dimensional Library, where you can find books from or about almost every dimension you can imagine," Hekapoo said in a joking dramatic tone while gesturing towards the never-ending rows of books. "Though don't bother looking up your own since it'll only show it from your perspective." "Really? Why's that, Hekapoo?" Marco asked as he walked up to the flaming redhead, not even flinching when she smacked the back of his head, singeing his hair a bit. "Security and privacy reasons. Now come on, I still have one last thing to show you guys," Hekapoo said before walking down a seemingly random hallway with the rest of the group in tow. As they walked, Star, Tom, and Kelly pulled random books off the shelves and peered into them curiously. Star sighed happily, as hers was about a mermaid falling in love with a prince and getting married, while Tom tossed his back with a dull look as it was like a children's book on the adventures of a talking pickle superhero. Meanwhile, Kelly dropped hers with a face that matched her hair, the pages of her book covered in gruesome images that would make even the strongest stomach uneasy. "Like I said, any story imaginable, so be careful what you read," Hekapoo drawled with smirk at seeing the greenette's reaction. "I'll take that under advisement," Kelly replied weakly, gulping down the bile building in her throat as she flipped the book closed with her foot. "So why did you bring us here, Hekapoo? Last I checked, you're not one to do something like this unless you have something to benefit from it," Marco said, once again ignoring the slap he got when he called the woman Hekapoo. "Meh, normally you would be right about that, but honestly I'm just been bored out of my skull lately," Hekapoo admitted with a shrug. "There's been absolutely no incidents that require my attention for weeks now, so I've been coming here to pass the time and ended up finding something I think you guys would be interested in." "Well, mostly you and Star, but since those two were with you already I figured might as well let them tag along." "Well, don't I feel real appreciated," Tom said sarcastically while Kelly just smiled somewhat awkwardly. "So, could you tell us what it is you found exactly, or are we just gonna have to keep following you towards the devil only knows?" "Oh, relax you drama queen, we're already here," Hekapoo said as they rounded a corner, revealing a small theater-like area with an old-fashioned projection screen, several plush chairs, a mini-fridge, and a large plain leather book set upon a podium. "Say hello to the group reading area." "Ooh, this place is nice," Star said while flopping into one of the chairs, sighing as she sank into its soft padding. "So comfy." "Of course they are, considering they cost 300 gold coins apiece," Hekapoo said proudly as she grabbed the book off the podium and took a seat of her own before turning her attention to Marco, Tom, and Kelly. "What are you dumb-dums waiting for, an invitation?" Taking the not-so-subtle hint, the trio quickly found a seat and got themselves comfortable. Tom took the chair next to Star. Meanwhile, Marco and Kelly took the love seat that was next to Hekapoo, who promptly dropped the book she was holding onto the hoodie-wearing boy's lap. "Curiosity broke the scissors," by the Curious Kitsune, Marco read aloud with a raised brow before turning towards the flaming redhead. "Is this why you brought us here? To read a book together?" "Nope, you'll be reading. The rest of us will be watching," Hekapoo explained with a lazy grin while gesturing to the projection screen, which now showed the same title that Marco had just read. "I would ask, but it'd probably just give me a headache, wouldn't it?" "Yep. Whatever, you guys want to do this? Marco asked while looking to the rest of his friends. Might as well, I don't have anything planned for today, Kelly said with a shrug. If Starship's up for it then so am I, Tom stated. MPGHPHGOIDGJ. Star mumbled through a mouthful of popcorn that she'd magicked into existence, an excited look on her face as she stared at the screen with anticipation. With the decision unanimous, Marco flipped the book open to the first page, Chapter 1. Star. I don't think this is a good idea. A teen boy with brown hair wearing a bright red hoodie said nervously. Hey. That's Marco. Star exclaimed with wide eyes as she dropped the popcorn in her hands and pointed towards the screen, Kelly and Tom sharing her shocked expression while Marco only looked mildly surprised. So that's why you wanted us to read this? It's about us? The hooded boy asked as he glanced at the flaming redhead, who shrugged while casually sipping at a large glass mug she'd pulled out of a small portal. Pretty much. Figured you guys would want in after I read the first chapter. Marco. Read. Now, Star yelled impatiently. You weren't wrong. Marco said somewhat dully while Hekapoo giggled. You heard Glossaric. Locked dimensions are locked for a reason. Locked dimensions? Tom asked with a raised brow. It'll explain in a second, Hekapoo stated, getting a nod from the demonic teen. And that just makes me want to see them more, Marco. A blonde teen girl with heart marks on her cheeks and a red devil horn hairband exclaimed excitedly, her arms flailing around with a wand that looked like something you'd find in a magical girl anime and an ornate pair of scissors clasped in either hand. Just imagine all the amazing things we'll get to see and awesome adventures we'll get to have. That's Star all right. Marco, Tom, and Kelly thought with identical smirks while the princess in question danced in her seat excitedly. Oh my gosh, it's actually me, this is so cool. Star. Calm down please. Marco said while giving his friend a slightly stern look. I can't read the story if you keep cutting me off every 5 seconds. His words did the trick as Star suddenly went still in her seat, her eyes locked on the screen as she shook with barely contained excitement. Knowing that he had maybe 2 minutes before the next inevitable outburst, Marco quickly resumed reading. These two were Marco Diaz, a Latino-American boy who tended to be overly cautious and a bit of a neat freak, and Star Butterfly, an energetic princess from another dimension who'd been living with Marco's family for the last few days as an exchange student while she learned to control the power of her wand. During that time, Marco had to deal with some of the craziest and oddest situations in his life. A prominent example being when one of Star's friends Ponyhead, a literal floating unicorn head, visited with the intention of having one last blowout before being sent to a reform school. Marco couldn't help the grin that spread across his lips at reading those paragraphs. Man, it feels like so long ago since then. He thought as the memory of his first few adventures with Star passed through his mind. Of course for him it was a really long time ago, given he'd spent 16 years in the span of 8 minutes chasing Hekapoo through her personal dimension, along a few various others she dumped him into in order to earn his own dimensional scissors. But let's not argue semantics. Afterwards, the bodiless horse left Star with the scissors the girl was currently holding, which were capable of cutting open portals to other dimensions. No, seriously. Be honest with me, Hekapoo. You chose to make dimensional scissors as actual scissors for laughs, didn't you? Marco asked, unable to stop himself from rolling his eyes when Hekapoo nodded her head. Several hundred years and it's still funny as hell watching people's reactions when they see my beauties at work for the first time. Hekapoo giggled while one of her arms popped out of a portal behind Marco and smacked the back of his head. Anyway, being the curious and excitable girl she was, Star quickly learned everything that she could about the handy tool, and stumbled upon an interesting related subject, locked dimensions. These were dimensions that almost all form of dimensional travel was blocked, whether it be from a naturally occurring phenomenon or intentionally sealed off because of the dangers they held. Ah, that makes sense, Tom said upon hearing the explanation. $5 says Starship's gonna try to go to one of those. Oh please Tom, we all know that's a sucker's bet, Marco rebuffed his friend with a scoff. 20 says her attempt ends in an explosion. I'll take that action. 30 says she succeeds with only a few minor issues. I'm with Marco, but I say that she summons a monster, Kelly added. Come on guys, I wasn't that bad, Star said with a huff. Star. The very first thing you did after we met was turn a butterfly into a monster that abducted a student and set half the school on fire. You were that bad. Marco retorted flatly, making his friend pout while he, Tom, and Kelly handed a few bills to Hekapoo, who was suddenly dressed like a professional bookie. And naturally, Star wanted to go to one of these places almost immediately after learning about them, despite the numerous warnings and people saying that it was an extremely bad idea. You never were one to walk down the beaten path, Marco said with a chuckle while Star smiled sheepishly. How do you even plan to do this? Everything you found on locked dimensions said that dimensional scissors don't work on them at all, Marco stated, before sighing as Star wiggled her wand in front of his face. Of course you're gonna use your wand. Double my bet, Marco and Kelly said at the same time while handing Hekapoo more money. Yep, if I channel the magic from it into the scissors, then it should boost them enough to work, the princess said while carelessly twirling the two magical items in her hands. Or it'll cause a huge disastrous mess that we'll have to spend all day cleaning up, again, Marco thought with a grimace. That was pretty much our routine for those first few weeks, wasn't it? Marco asked cheekily while Star huffed again with a small embarrassed blush, unable to deny his point. Fine, but why are we doing it in my room? I just finished cleaning in here, he said while gesturing to the tidy bedroom they were currently standing in. Sorry Marco, but the laser puppies are napping in mine right now and I don't want to disturb them. Now stop worrying so much, I'll be careful, Star said, shrugging off the boy's concerns as she held her arms out in front of her and pressed the top of the wand against the scissor blades while Marco dived for cover. Bzzzt poof. Perfect. Slowly peeking out from his cover, Marco was greeted by the sight of Star grinning as she held up the dimensional scissors which now gave off a soft pink glow. Looking around the room, he was honestly amazed to find it completely unharmed. That was surprisingly anticlimactic, the hoodie-wearing boy couldn't help but say as he fully stood up. Yeah, this is usually the part where everything goes crazy and I start fearing for my life, Marco agreed with his other, surprised at the lack of flamboyant results. Looks like you're finally starting to get a hand on your magi. Alright, let's give these a try, Star cut him off as she jabbed the scissors in front of her and snipped the very air, causing a small cut to appear. Kraka chutzt. I spoke too soon, Marco yelled as chaos erupted throughout the room. There it is. Lightning arced all over the place, igniting multiple things aflame and leaving dark scorch marks. Powerful winds blew around practically everything not nailed to the floor, and random areas of the room were suddenly frozen over. Unstable dimensional rifts, never a pretty sight, Hekapoo said seriously with Marco nodding in agreement. Both had seen their fair share of such, the former since it was her job to handle such issue and latter during his 16-year hunt for the former. Remember that one that engulfed an entire mountain range in the quasi-swamp dimension? The hooded boy asked with a nostalgic smile. Yeah, you took out 6 of my clones at once while they were distracted by it, good times. Meanwhile, in the exact center of all this, Star firmly stood her ground as she struggled to continue cutting. With each snip of the scissors, the portal grew larger, but the destruction happening around her got steadily worse. The temperature in the room skyrocketed, melting all the ice and causing the two to sweat profusely, before plummeting just as rapidly. Then, hot steaming water started pouring from growing tear, soaking the floor and causing the forming ice to crackle and hiss from the sudden warmth. How is she not getting hurt by all that? Kelly asked in confusion as they watched the various hazards somehow miss Star despite being at point-blank range. Protection charms. They activate automatically for whoever's wielding the scissors whilst they are being used, just in case something like this happens, and will prevent most forms of harm, Hekapoo stated before pausing to take a long draught of her beverage. I may be a lax and laid-back kinda gal, but I put the whole 9 yards into each pair of scissors I make. Why you need tea to SS stop Star? Marco yelled with chattering teeth, clinging to his bed frame for dear life as his body was jerked around in the air like a ragdoll. This I is getting T2F far out of hand. Unfortunately, other Marco doesn't have any of that protection whatsoever, Hekapoo said as said boy, Kelly, and Tom gained worried looks. Star was concerned as well, but her face also held guilt as she watched her friend's counterpart flail around as he narrowly avoided getting killed. Am I really that reckless? Normally she wouldn't think too much about the danger she and Marco got in, mostly because of the excitement and adrenaline flowing through her at the time. Now that she was looking at the results of her other's actions from an outside perspective though, it was making her consider all the shenanigans she and her bestie had gotten into since they'd met. Sure, Marco could take care of himself pretty well thanks to his karate training and now 16 years of combat experience, but even then, the vast majority of their adventures ended with them coming out on top by the skin of their teeth. I should probably get Marco an apology gift for all of that. Star thought with a frown that quickly turned into a smile as her cheek marks turned into light bulbs. Oh, I know, I'll get him that new collar he'd been wanting for nachos. Just a little bit longer. It's almost finished, Star yelled back, the hearts on her cheeks having turned into tick marks as she tried to make the last cut, only for the scissors to refuse to budge. Gritting her teeth, the princess dropped her wand so that she could grip the cutting tool's handles with both hands and squeeze them with all her might. It's always that last step that makes you really work for it, Kelly said wisely, getting nods of agreement all around. Star. The hooded boy screamed as a bolt narrowly missed turning him into an extra crispy fried teenager. Hold on, Marco. Star's hands trembled violently and sweat practically showered from her brow, but a wide grin spread across her lips once she started to feel the scissors close. I'm almost there. With one last grunt of effort, the magic paper cutter finally sliced through the fabric of reality and the portal stabilized, turning into a black hole-like vortex that lazily spun in the air. Ha! Looks like I win, Tom exclaimed while holding his hand out towards Hekapoo. However, instead of handing him the money, she simply wagged her finger with a knowing grin. Not so fast, Hellboy Jr., give it one more paragraph, the flaming redhead said, making the demonic prince sigh and slink back into his seat. Yes, it worked, Star cheered happily as everything settled down. I told you it would work, Marco. Now come on, I can't wait to crackle. The blonde girl stopped mid-sentence as an odd cracking sound reached her ears. Following the sound to its source, her eyes widened in shock as she watched glowing fractures rapidly spread across the blades of the dimensional scissors in her hands. Oh no, Marco thought nervously as his eyes flickered towards Hekapoo, who he could tell was quite upset despite her calm appearance. To most she would appear the same as normal, but he'd learned all her little tells whilst hunting her and her clones. The flame atop her head was a slighter redder color than normal. Her eyes had narrowed a little with the left one twitching almost unnoticeably, and she was repeatedly tapping the middle finger of her free hand against her armrest, leaving a small scorch mark. Of course, the fact that her drink had evaporated and the cup that had been holding it was rapidly turning into a blob of molten glass in her grasp was a pretty good giveaway as well. Snapping her gaze back to the portal before her, the color rapidly drained from Star's face and her cheek marks turned into hazard signs as similar cracks were spreading across it as well. Realizing what was about to happen, she turned towards Marco and reached out towards him. Then everything went white. Star, Kelly, and Tom were on the edges of their seats as they stared at the screen expectantly, worry and nervousness on their faces. Sure, they knew this wasn't actually Star, at least for them. It was still rather nerve-wracking to see her doppelganger in danger like this. UHG. A weak groan escaped Marco's lips as the world around him slowly came back into focus and numbly took in the sight of his destroyed bedroom from the floor he lay on. As his brain kicked back into gear though, his shock swiftly turned to worry for his friend as he looked to where she had been and saw nothing but shards of broken metal laying on the floor. Saint Star. Marco didn't even notice as Hekapoo wordlessly deposited the money on his lap. His attention was focused solely on the book he was reading. Breaking into a heavy coughing fit, the boy tried to sit up only to find himself pinned from the shoulders down under the burnt remains of his bed. Not deterred in the slightest, he wiggled around as much as he could to try and get free. Yeah, not gonna happen, Marco admitted quietly with a grumble. His bed frame was solid oak, no way was his other gonna be able to move it in his current condition. After several minutes of useless struggling, Marco froze as a swirling circle of fire suddenly appeared right at the epicenter of the explosion. Thinking that there was about to be another blast, the hooded teen braced himself as best he could, only to once more be caught by surprise as a lovely woman with pale skin, long red hair, and two horns sticking out of her head wearing an orange ball gown and a black tiara with a small flame floating above it stepped out. I've always known how to make an entrance, Hekapoo said jokingly, though with a slightly irritated edge in her tone. She looked around most of the devastated bedroom with a mask of neutrality on her face that only broke when she saw the metal pieces on the floor. With a deep frown on her face, she bent over and scooped up several of the scissor fragments with her hand. Straightening back up, the demonic-looking woman stared at the shards sternly for several moments before suddenly jerking her head to the side, so she was looking straight at Marco with a powerful glare as the fire above her head flared. "Tell me, boy, who's the dumbass that fucked with things they shouldn't have?" That sentence actually managed to snap Star, Kelly, and Tom out of their worry as they looked from the on-screen Hekapoo to theirs with stunned faces. "What?" the dimensional travel enforcer asked with a raised brow after this went on for a full minute. "Sorry, it's just hard to imagine you of all people swearing or looking so angry," Kelly said, being the first to recover from her surprise. "You're always just so chill. Like I said, I put a ton of effort into each pair of scissors I make, with every single pair personally made by my own hands for a specific individual. Let's see you be chill after seeing something you worked so hard on be destroyed because a foolish princess got too curious for her own good." Hekapoo replied sourly, making said princess gulp nervously before ducking behind her bestie for safety. "Marco, please keep reading. Meanwhile, this is just what I needed after all those stupid D ranks." A boy with spiky blonde hair and 3 whisker-like marks on either cheek said as he sunk into the warm soothing water of a hot spring with nothing on but a towel around his waist. "What the heck? Who's this guy?" Tom demanded as the screen switched to a completely different and unknown person. "Maybe someone from the Dimension Star was trying to go too," Kelly suggested with a slight blush on her face at seeing a boy mostly naked, even in the important bits were covered by water. "It'll probably explain it soon, so just try to be patient." This was Naruto Uzumaki, #1 hyperactive knuckle-headed ninja of the village of Konohagakure and Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Power of human sacrifice. Marco thought with a raised brow, knowing a bit of Japanese thanks to some extra credit classes he'd taken, wondering what the book meant by that. "Ooh, he's a ninja? Like those mutant turtles in that cartoon you showed me?" Star asked excitedly, snapping Marco from his thoughts as a chuckle escaped his lips. "Maybe Star, but it is a different dimension, so ninja might mean something else for them," Marco said, getting the girl to calm down a little. He had just finished up several D-rank missions, aka chores for lazy civilians, with his team and was now enjoying soak in one of Konoha's hot spring spas. After a few minutes of nothing but silence though, a bored sigh escaped the boy's lips as he glanced around the empty spring. "Man, I can't believe they all bailed on me." He was supposed to be hanging out with a few of his guy friends, Shikamaru, Choji, Shino, and Kiba, along with their sensei Kakashi and Asuma, so that they could chat about how their first week as official ninja had been going. It was a little thing that they had come up with to celebrate fully graduating from the academy. "That sounds pretty fun. Why wouldn't his friends show up?" Star asked with a titled head, unable to understand such a thing. "I'm sure they had good reasons," Tom said assuringly. Unfortunately, Choji ended up going to an eating contest instead, with Asuma and Shikamaru tagging along to make sure he didn't go overboard, and to probably take a nap in the latter's case. Shino's hive got the bug equivalent of the common cold, so the quiet boy was on bed rest for the next few days. Kiba was at home nursing his pride and face from the beatdown he got when he made a bad joke about his sister without realizing she was right behind him. Hell, even his teammate Sasuke was missing, but that was rather expected since unless it was training, brooding, or tomatoes, the emo was having nothing to do with it. Kakashi was simply too lazy to even bother coming, enough said. Scratch that, some of them had good reasons, Tom corrected himself awkwardly. Is it just me, or does this book make it seem like we should know these guys already? Kelly asked, getting everyone to turn their attention towards her. Yeah, actually, they did just list them off without giving much context to them, Marco said as he went over the paragraph again before Hekapoo reached over and flipped all the way to the end of the book. That's because all the character information is at the back of the book, see, she said while stopping at a pair of pages that held Marco and Star's pictures along with some basic information such as personality type, immediate family, affiliations, and a short overview. Ah, thanks Hekapoo, Marco said as he started to read them, only to be cut off once more when the fiery redhead forcefully flipped the pages back to where they were. You can indulge your curiosity when the chapter's over, now get back to reading, she stated before retaking her seat, a brand new mug in hand. Not one to be deterred though, and not wanting to have wasted the money he spent to be here, Naruto kept trying to enjoy himself, letting the mineral-rich hot water soak away the stress and soreness in his muscles. It wasn't easy, however, as the splashing and yelling coming over the divider from the women's side kept reminding him how he wasn't getting to hang out with his friends like planned. "Ooh," Marco and Tom hissed sympathetically, talk about rubbing salt into the wound. "Oh, who am I kidding, this blows," he said with another sigh, sending the dividing wall a jealous look before sinking further into the water, somehow missing the pale lavender eye that was staring at him through a small hole. Poor Naruto-kun, the owner of said eye, a lovely young girl with short dark blue hair, thought with a sad look. Her name was Hinata Hyuga, a shy kind girl and member of the highly respected Hyuga clan. Both Tom and Marco blushed as Hinata's mostly nude form popped up on screen, the only thing protecting her modesty being the water and a towel that barely managed to cover her developed chest. Meanwhile, Kelly gained a jealous look as she looked from the brunette's already well-developed chest and her own. "She seems nice," Star said, not at all fazed at all by Hinata's lack of dress, while Hekapoo was busy taking photos of the former three's reactions. Hearing more yelling coming from behind her, the brunette briefly stopped her peeper, checking up on Naruto to look back, where a girl with pink hair and another with platinum blonde yelled at each other while a red-eyed raven-haired woman held them apart with a dull look. "Sasuke-kun is mine, Ino pig. No way, forehead. He loves me. Like hell he does. Oh god. People actually act like that?" Kelly asked in disbelief at seeing the two girls fighting over a boy's love. "I thought that was just some stupid TV trope." "You think that's bad? You should see the cheerleaders at school whenever a new hot jock pops up. Last time ended with 3 of them in the hospital," Marco said as he and Star shivered, remembering when that all-out catfight had broken out. In order, these 3 were Sakura, Naruto's teammate and crush, Ino, Sakura's ex-friend and love rival, and Kurenai, Hinata's team sensei. Unable to help herself, Hinata rolled her eyes at the sight while going back to discreetly spying on a bored Naruto. "Ahem, and what do you think you're doing, Eep?" Or at least she thought she'd been discreet. "Somebody's busted," Hekapoo said in a sing-song tone, making the rest of the group laugh a bit. Jumping in surprise at the voice right behind her, Hinata spun around with a heavy blush on her face, before cringing as she found herself being glared at suspiciously by Sakura, while Kurenai looked at her with an odd mixture of amusement and disappointment on her face, and Ino smirked with a gleam in her eye. "You were trying to peek on Sasuke-kun, weren't you?" Sakura accused while jabbing a finger into the pale-eyed girl's developing chest. "One-track mind that one," Kelly said dully. "Oh please, forehead, everyone knows she has a huge crush on Naruto," Ino said while shoving the pinkette back and pulled Hinata into a one-armed hug. But who knew little Miss Wallflower Hinata had it in her to try peeping on him. I guess what they say about the quiet ones is true after all. "What do they say about quiet ones?" Star asked innocently, causing Tom, Kelly, and Marco to blush deeply while Hekapoo broke out into laughter. We'll tell you later," Marco told her after a long awkward pause. At this point, Hinata's face was literally glowing red and steam slowly rose from her ears as she tried to deny everything, only for her words to come out a jumbled stuttering mess. "Really? She's actually into Naruto baka?" Sakura asked with a raised brow. "I thought that was just one of those stupid rumors you started up for fun." "What's baka mean?" Tom asked with scrunched brows. "It sounds like an insult to me." "It is. Baka has several translations, but the most common are idiot, moron, and retard," Marco said, making the demonic teen frown. "Hey, I'll have you know that I only deal with authentic gossip," Ino said confidently, her chest puffing out in pride. "Speaking of which, I wonder what the boys are talking about, or how Sasuke looks without his shirt." Her smirk growing, Ino pulled Hinata out of the way as she excitedly took the girl's spot at the hole. "Boy is she in for a disappointing surprise," Hekapoo said with a snicker. However, it took exactly 0.01 seconds for that eagerness to turn to confusion when she saw Naruto by himself, lazily splashing water at a nearby rock. "What the? Naruto's the only one over there." "Say what?" Squeezing in next to the blonde, Sakura blinked in surprise as she saw the same thing. "The heck? Where is everyone?" "They're probably still getting undressed," Ino said before she and Sakura shifted in place, so they were looking towards the changing room, hoping to see Sasuke as he walked out. Fast-forward sound effect. Where is that coming from? Marco muttered as said sound effect played while the screen showed 30 seconds of Naruto moving around really fast in a bored manner. I actually don't know, Hekapoo admitted with a shrug. Okay. They aren't here, Ino said as she backed away from the wall after 5 minutes passed with no signs of anyone coming. Maybe something came up. For everyone but Naruto? Sakura asked disbelievingly. They probably just decided to bail at the last minute. Sadly, that's pretty much what happened. The group thought with frowns except for Hekapoo. The only ones who had legit excuses for not showing up were Shino and Kiba, while the rest pretty much found anything else to do other than go to the hot spring. Yeah, that sounds like something they'd do, Ino said with a frown. I kinda feel bad for Naruto though, I heard he was really looking forward to this. Meh, he'll be fine. Just buy him some ramen and the idiot will forget all about it. Sakura said while sinking back into the steaming water, not seeing the small angry look Hinata sent her before the shy girl went back to checking on Naruto. Man, if she was any colder then that water would be melting her, Kelly remarked, disliking how dismissive the girl was of the boy's feelings. Amazing, such concern for your teammates' well-being, it's inspiring, Kurenai said sarcastically, giving the pinkhead a disapproving look. She's his teammate, wow, now I'm really starting to feel bad for the guy, Tom said while Marco, Star, and Kelly nodded in agreement. That did sound sorta cold, Sakura, even if this is Naruto we're talking about, Ino couldn't help but admit. Sakura shrugged in response, her face not changing. Maybe a little, but I'm not wrong. I've yet to see something that keeps him down for long. That comment is not assuring in the least, Kelly said, since it implied that this Sakura girl was used to seeing her teammate in emotional distress. Ino nodded, knowing what Sakura was talking about while Kurenai rolled her eyes before looking towards Hinata as the girl shook her arm lightly. What is it, Hinata? There's something weird happening with NNN Naruto-kun. The brunette stuttered while suddenly pulling the raven-haired woman to the peeping spot. Surprised by the girl's actions, Kurenai didn't manage to regain her wits until she was already looking through the hole in the wall and saw what Hinata was talking about. Naruto himself was fine, albeit confused and on edge, the reason for such clear as the water around him was roiling madly while emanating a bright aurora of colors. Well, either someone turned up the heat, or that's Star about to make her grand debut, Marco said jokingly, making said princess giggle while playfully punching his arm. What the hell? Kurenai muttered as her eye narrowed at the sight, before widening as the light started rapidly increasing. Get down, she yelled, grabbing Hinata and tackling the other two girls into the spring. Boom. Gaw. Ah. What the heck? My ears. Everyone but Hekapoo cried out in surprise as the actual sound of an explosion rang through the air. Said demoness-looking woman had a cheeky grin as she took out the earplugs she'd stuffed into her ears a few seconds earlier. Just as funny as I expected, she thought as she watched the rest of the group rubbing their ears and grumbling from the sudden sound. A massive explosion shook the area, blowing the walls of the hot spring to pieces and sending hot water showering everywhere. As the effects of the blast were dying down, Sakura, Ino, and Hinata burst to the surface gasping for breath while Kurenai simply stood up, blood leaking from all their ears. What was that? Sakura screamed out once she finished coughing up the water she'd accidentally swallowed. What? Ino yelled back, unable to hear what the pinkhead was saying. And that's why you don't jump in the water when there's an explosion, kids, it'll just make it much worse for you, Hekapoo said wisely while pretending to rub a beard she didn't have. I learned that the hard way, Marco thought with a grimace, rubbing his ear as phantom pain pulsed through it. On the second year of his Hekapoo hunt, he dived into a lake to avoid an explosive spell she'd fired at him. A blown-out eardrum and 6 months of constant ringing in both ears made sure he remembered never to make that same mistake again. Neither Hinata or Kurenai spoke, the former being too dazed to while the latter knew it was pointless to try since she recognized the pain in her inner ears and the disorientation she felt being caused by ruptured eardrums. Well, that and they were both boggled by the sight they saw when they looked back towards the origin of the explosion. Naruto sat in the exact same spot, his face a mask of shock and surprise. He had various minor heat and scald burns across his body and his towel was basically a pile of rags, but other than that he was surprisingly unharmed. Once again Kelly's cheeks heated up at the sight of the mostly naked teen, Only this time Star joined her as they could both just see little Naruto, peeking out from under the mostly ruined towel. Despite his lack of injuries though, he remained completely immobile and kept his gaze locked forward. Where an equally shocked-looking Star stared right back with her arm outstretched towards her fellow blonde. "Hi. Yo. Well guys, what do you think?" Hekapoo asked rhetorically as the words, "End of Chapter 1, covered the screen. End Chapter 2. Taking a brief break to get some snacks and drinks for themselves, the group got back into their spots while a certain princess bounced eagerly in her seat. "Come on Marco, keep reading. I want to know what happens next," Star said excitedly, getting the Latino boy to sigh in exasperation as he flipped the page. All right, hold your warnicorns Star, last time. Hi. Yo. Couldn't have summed it up better myself, Hekapoo said jokingly. And now Star was nervous, extremely nervous, the absolutely most nervous she'd ever been in her entire life. She was sitting on a cold metal chair inside a small room made almost entirely out of dull gray stone, with the only exception being the solid metal door to one side. Her hands were bound to either side of the table in front of her and in a pair of odd gloves that kept her from moving her fingers. To top it all off, there was an odd slip of paper on her forehead with the kanji for suppress that made her feel weak and sluggish. "Wow, isn't that a little overkill?" Kelly asked as the projector showed Star's current condition. "We imprison people in crystal prisons for years, most of the time without even giving them a proper trial," Hekapoo stated bluntly, making Star shiver as she remembered that happening to her briefly when Romulus froze her. "I retract my previous statement," Kelly muttered nervously. It had been a few hours since her rather dramatic entrance at the hot spring, and the girl was getting increasingly worried for her own well-being. Shortly after her appearance, a bunch of scary people wearing animal masks had detained her while she was recovering from the shock of both the explosion and seeing a boy around her age mostly naked. Both Kelly and Star blushed lightly as they were reminded of that little detail, only made worse when Hekapoo's arm popped out of a portal in front of them with a picture of that scene in hand. Eep. Sighing in exasperation, Marco reached behind himself and pulled out a spray bottle. Pointing it at Hekapoo, he pulled the trigger a few times, spraying a few jets of water into the demonic woman's face, making her recoil slightly. "Bad Hekapoo, no excessive teasing." "Fine, spoil sport," Hekapoo grumbled while pulling her hand back through the portal before sticking it through another one and swatting the back of his head, this time actually igniting the back of his hair for a few moments before he put it out with the spray bottle still in hand. Ever since, she'd been held within this room, undergoing repeated interrogation by different people. The first had been a scarred man with a bandana covering his head called Ibiki, who had asked the princess things like why she was in Konoha and who she was. "Man. I feel like that guy could freeze water just by staring at it," Tom muttered with a shiver as Ibiki's face popped on screen with his trademark neutral intimidation expression. Being the honest girl she was, and with the intimidating aura the man gave off, Star told him the full story despite how worried she was that he wouldn't believe her. She still remembered Marco's reaction when she first showed her magic, and unlike then she didn't have her wand to prove anything she was saying. "Oh yeah, that could be problematic," Star said with a nervous laugh. "No kidding, unless your other is ridiculously lucky then she's probably gonna be tossed into a loony bin," Kelly said bluntly. However, despite how incredulous her words sounded, the man's impassive expression didn't waver at all. Once she'd finished, Ibiki thanked her for cooperating and excused himself. A few minutes later, an energetic woman with light purple hair who waltzed in and said her name was Anko. She seemed like a nice person, constantly making jokes and even feeding Star some tasty food called dango, which the girl was really thankful for since she was really hungry, before asking her some of the same things Ibiki did. "Well, she's a pretty nice person," Star said with a smile. "Yeah, but isn't she a little bit underdressed?" Marco asked with a blush as Anko's revealing outfit, before his face turned positively scarlet as he read the next sentence. However, she also added several seemingly random and personal questions, like what her favorite color was, if she thought the boy at the hot springs was cute, what her home life was like, if she'd ever kissed a boy, what she did in her free time, or if she'd ever seen a boy's junk. Bawahahaha. Oh man, this is priceless. Hekapoo laughed boisterously as she saw everyone's blushing faces before turning towards Star with a wide grin. "So Star, have you ever seen a boy's junk before?" WWA? No, oh of course and not, Star exclaimed, stuttering heavily as her voice cracked and her heart marks glowed bright pink, making Hekapoo laugh even harder, not caring at all as Marco repeatedly sprayed her. And oddly enough, no matter how much she wanted to not answer some, read most of those questions, Star felt the answers practically fall out of her mouth before she could even think. Well, you were never one to keep a secret, were you, Starship? Tom said as he managed to get his embarrassment under control. By the time Enko left, Star's face was as red as a tomato and the hearts on her cheeks were literally glowing a bright pink. Oh man, it's like looking in a mirror, Hekapoo thought with one last giggle as she glanced from the real Star and the one on screen. The last person to see her was a middle-aged blonde man, who didn't say anything other than giving his name, Inoichi, before making a bunch of funny motions with his hands, and the Princess of Muni blacked out. When she came to, her head was aching softly, and the man was leaving. Okay, I do not like the sound of that at all, Marco stated with the rest of the group, even Hekapoo, nodding in agreement. Me either, Hekapoo said, already having an inkling to what happened, but on the plus side, it would appear that the people of that world have some form of magic, so Star's chances of not appearing insane just went up. I guess that's a plus. Star mumbled quietly before pointing at the man's headband. I wonder why they all wear that. Do you think it's some kind of fashion statement? Nah, I'd say it's more likely a kind of identification badge, likely to separate the warriors from civilians, Hekapoo said, having seen similar methods in various different dimensions. And now here she was, all by herself, stranded in an unknown dimension without any way out or her wand, being held prisoner by equally unknown people. As endlessly optimistic as she usually was, Star was having trouble keeping a positive outlook on her current situation as the time stretched on. I should have listened to Marco, she thought with a quiet whimper as the sole light in the room flickered ominously. You really should. A lot of our problems would have been so much easier to deal with if you did, Marco said, snapping Star out of her embarrassment as she gave her friend an affronted look. Hey, I'm not that bad, Star. This whole story is based on the fact you are that bad, the Latino boy stated, making the Princess of Muni pause for a few moments before settling back in her seat with a defeated huff. Unknown to the out-of-the-world princess though, she wasn't as alone as she thought, as 4 people stood on the other side of the wall she was facing, which was somehow transparent for them. Cool, it's like that one-way mirror from that TV show you showed me, Order of Law, Star said with Marco nodding in agreement. The first 3 were the people who'd been interrogating Star, while the 4th was an elderly man wearing traditional with robes with red highlights, who'd just finished reading over several different papers. This was Hiruzen Sarutobi, the 3rd Hokage of Konoha and renowned genius when it came to politics and the shinobi arts. Huh, he seems nice, kind of grandfatherly, Kelly said as they all looked over the aged leader. You're certain that she isn't a spy or assassin? Ooh crap, this could be so much worse than we thought, Marco muttered as he and the rest of the group paled, minus Hekapoo given her skin was already pure white. Positive Hokage-sama, Ibiki said without hesitation. The girl definitely shows signs of fighting skill, but she is no ninja. Her story also stayed completely consistent throughout both mine and Anko's talks with her. Yeah, the little Gaki didn't even notice the truth serum that was laced her dango with given her. Her reactions to the test questions were priceless. Anko added, unable to hold back a chuckle. Wait, she drugged me? Star exclaimed with wide eyes. I figured as much, Hekapoo said calmly while sipping from her mug. They pulled a classic scare and care. The first guy frightens the crap out of you to test your resolve, then the next one acts all friendly so's to trick you into lowering your guard. She checks outs mentally as well. Her memories show none of the fragmentation or degradation that they would from someone suffering from delusions or hallucinations, Inoichi stated while holding up a pair of red scissor handles. I feel violated, Star muttered weakly while clutching her head. Sure it wasn't her, but the idea that someone had gone through her mind and saw all her thoughts and memories was downright disturbing. Not even Tom's, Kelly's, and Marco's comforting words did little to ease that invasive feeling. The scientists did confirm that these had been emitting an odd energy. From what they could tell, it definitely wasn't chakra, but it dispersed before they could get a proper sample, most likely because they're broken. So they don't think you're a spy or crazy, that's good, Marco said with a weak smile that Star shared. What about the other item? The old man asked, getting Inoichi to lower the scissor handles and hold up Star's wand. Unlike the scissors, it was still intact thankfully, but the magical tool had clearly seen better days as several cracks and scorch marks covered its surface. Until Marco read the next paragraph. So not only was she in prison, but the people holding her were in possession of the royal family wand. That will probably not end well, Hekapoo said while Kelly and Tom grimaced at the sight of the damaged magical relic. Oh man, I'm doomed. I am so very doomed, Star thought in despair as she slumped in her seat, her cheek marks turning into crying emojis. Wow, we are really getting into this story, Marco thought as he watched his friend's reactions, not really fazed by the damaged wand since he'd already seen it completely destroyed twice now, though he was a bit worried to see someone else other than Star in possession of the magic relic. It's also giving off some form of energy and even seems to still be operational, but we haven't been able to get any form of reaction from it or the samples we took so far, the blonde said as he placed both items in the elderly man's hand. Wait, what? The whole group asked in surprise at hearing this paragraph. No reaction. But how? Anyone should be able to use the wand if they try, shouldn't they? Star asked as she looked down at her own wand, which was a sleeker and more detailed-looking version of the one on screen. Well, me and Lobster Claws were able to, and Ludo used a piece of it, so yeah, I don't see why none of them can't get it to work, Marco said with a shrug. Maybe it's broken from the explosion as well. Not likely, otherwise it would have stopped giving off magical energy like the scissors, Hekapoo said with a shake of her head. Good point. Guess we'll just have to keep reading then to find out, Marco said before quickly returning his attention to the book in his grasp but not before adding, plus, now we don't have to worry about them abusing the wand's power. Nodding his head in understanding, the old man gazed through the one-way wall at Star as she gradually grew more and more nervous with each passing second with a look of contemplation. After several minutes of silence, he seemed to be satisfied with what he saw and walked off. Star jumped slightly as the door opened once more and an elderly man walked in with a kind smile on his face. Hello Star-san. Sorry for startling you. San? Star repeated in confusion at the added suffix to her name. It's a Japanese term which is basically their version of Mr., Ms., and Mrs., Marco explained to the princess. Oh, thanks Marco. Hello sir, are you here to ask me more questions? She asked politely, albeit with nervousness and a tiny amount of exasperation mixed in. A few yes, but first, to the girl's surprise, as Hiruzen sat down he suddenly reached forwards and pulled off the gloves and the paper on her head before unlocking the cuffs around her wrists. I apologize for all the discomfort my people had to put you through, but with your interesting arrival we had to be sure you weren't here to cause any trouble. I'm sure you can understand. Would you look at that starship? Looks like he's gonna let you go after all, Tom said with a grin while everyone else visibly relaxed at the apparent good news. Yes sir, Star said with a nod as she rubbed her sore wrists. Does this mean you're letting me go? Well yes and no, or not, Star said with a wince, knowing just enough political wordplay to know what, well yes and no, meant. It was the, as her dad would put it, short way of saying, yes but there's a huge catch that will pretty much make it still a no anyway. Hiruzen said, getting a confused look in response until he elaborated, while it may have been an accident, you did do a considerable amount of property damage and had a few people sent to the hospital. Cringing once more, Star seemed to deflate as she sank further into her seat in defeat. Right, totally forgot about that part. Star gasped and started to apologize, only to be cut off when the elderly man raised his hand. Relax, it was only a few burns and ruptured eardrums. However, you will have to pay the costs for repairs, loss of business, and hospital bills. And how much will that be? Star asked, already dreading the answer. Normally, money wouldn't be an issue for her, what with her parents being royalty and all. But she had no way of contacting them at the moment, and she had a strong feeling these people wouldn't accept an IOU. So that's how we avoided getting in trouble whenever we caused mass amounts of property damage, Marco asked with a raised brow while Star nodded her head with a sheepish smile. Yeah, I didn't even know that they did that until shortly after I moved back into the castle. I stumbled into the accounting chamber by accident while they were going over the total cost of my stay, she admitted while rubbing the back of her head. Sighing in exasperation for the umpteenth time that day, Marco gazed at his friend dully. I know I'm going to regret asking this, But exactly how much debt are you, and most likely me as well, in with your parents right now? Well, smiling sheepishly, Star waved her wand, causing a manila folder to appear in front of Marco. That's the current tab so far. Paling a bit at the sheer size of the file, the Latino boy gingerly picked it up and flicked it open to the last page, which showed the current total, before immediately snapping it back shut with a blank expression. Star, we are so going to have a long talk about this when we get back. Oh come on Marco, it can't be, and I'm shutting up, Tom said, changing what he was saying mid-sentence with bugged-out eyes when Marco flashed the total for him to see. Roughly 720,000 Rio, 72,000 United States dollars, Hiruzen said, causing Star to pale rapidly at the large number. And judging by what you've told us, you don't exactly have that kind of money on hand. For those of us who aren't from Earth or haven't been there for very long, how bad is that? Kelly asked, though she could already tell it was pretty bad based on Star and Marco's horrified faces. You could buy a dozen cartloads of goblin dogs and not even be halfway there, Star stated, earning a low whistle from the greenette. No sir, I don't, the princess said sadly as she sank into her chair. Well then, that does leave you in a bit of a pickle, but I'm sure we can come up with a reasonable solution. Does this look familiar? Hiruzen asked while holding up Star's wand, causing the girl's eyes to widen in surprise. My wand? Star exclaimed in shock. How did you get that? What happened to it? One of my men found it like that floating inside the hot spring. The damage is most likely being from the explosion you caused. Hiruzen said, getting Star to wince a little. You claim to be able to cast magic with this, correct? Oh boy, I think I know where this is going, Marco thought worriedly. I can do all sorts of cool spells with it, although I am still learning how to use it properly. Star admitted with an awkward chuckle as she remembered all the mishaps she'd made when casting new spells. Those were some crazy times all right, Marco said with a nostalgic smile as he nudged Star's side. Remember when you accidentally turned our math teacher into a troll? Yeah. I wonder how Ms. Skulnick is doing, Star said, giggling a little as she remembered that particular misadventure. Okay then, would you mind giving me a small example? The elderly man asked while holding the wand out to her. Weird. Why would he just give you the wand back like that? Kelly asked with a raised brow. Maybe he's giving me the benefit of the doubt, Star suggested optimistically as she perked up a bit. Quickly swiping it out of his hands, Star looked the magic tool over thoroughly, a sigh of relief escaping her lips as she saw that the damage wasn't as bad as it looked before pointing it at the table. Blooming daisy sparkles. Most interesting, Hiruzen thought as dozens of glitter-covered flowers suddenly sprouted from the metal table's surface. Well then Butterfly-san, I do believe I have just the way for you to pay off your debt. Ah crap, I knew it. Marco groaned, earning odd looks from everyone but Hekapoo. What's wrong Marco? Kelly asked with a raised brow. You'll see in a moment if I'm right, the Latino boy told the greenette before he started reading again. Time skip. Cammy, I hate hospitals. Naruto groaned as he plopped down in a chair by a simple wooden table, a cup of freshly made instant ramen in hand. What's ramen? Star asked, the second part directed towards Marco. It's a noodle dish from Japan. The instant version is quick and easy to make but not very good for you nutrition-wise, Marco explained. He was dressed in his usual attire of a bright orange jacket and pants with a fluffy white collar and blue highlights, them and their stupid needles. After that weird incident at the hot springs, he'd been taken to the hospital to be checked over. However, by the time he'd gotten there, the blonde's injuries were all but gone already thanks to his natural healing factor. Wow, that sounds like a watered-down version of Toffee's healing, Marco said with a surprised look. Unfortunately, it turned out that he was overdue for several different inoculations and had to get several shots. Those are the worst, Star mumbled, shivering as she remembered when she had to go to the hospital on Earth to get vaccinated, just so she could continue going to school with Marco. Thankfully, despite the fact she was human, her immune system was similar enough to humans that the shots didn't have any bad side effects other than her catching an actual cold from the flu shot. The nurse was nice enough, even giving him a 2-for-1 coupon to his favorite food shack, Ichiraku's, afterwards. Though when he tried to see how Sakura was doing, she slapped the hell out of him while calling him a baka for some reason. Wow, talk about rude. Kelly said with a frown at hearing that. Why would she do that? Star asked, tilting her head in confusion. He probably just caught her in a bad mood. That kinda happens after you've been in an explosion, Hekapoo said. Knock knock knock. Naruto froze in the middle of slurping down his food, his head jerking towards the front door when he heard someone knocking on it rapidly. Fo the hef is FHAT. Probably Starship, Tom said with the others nodding in agreement. Nobody came by his place except for Iruka, his old teacher from the academy and big brother figure, and the Hokage, and both knew they didn't need to knock before entering. Well, that wasn't depressing at all, Hekapoo said sarcastically while giving the kid a brief look of pity. To be so used to not having any company that simply having someone knocking at the door being a rare occurrence was pretty sad. Why doesn't anyone visit him? He seems like such a nice guy, Star said with a frown. We'll probably find out as the story progresses, but if that's too long for you we could check out his profile after we finish the chapter. Marco suggested, getting the blonde princess to nod excitedly. Okay. So, naturally confused and curious, the whiskered blonde quickly swallowed the last few noodles in his mouth before standing up to find out. Knock knock knock. All right, I'm coming, Naruto yelled in annoyance as the knocking didn't stop. Pulling the door open, he prepared to voice his irritation further, only to stop cold at the sight before him. Standing in front of him was Anko, Ibiki, and the girl from the hot spring, who was rubbing her neck with a grimace with one hand while the other was firmly gripped her wand. A new addition, though, was the hite-8 around her noggin that looked just like the other three's, a blue headband with a metal plate on the front that was engraved with a stylized leaf. So that headband is a form of identification. Good guess there, Hekapoo, Marco told the demonic-looking redhead, making her grin as she sipped her new drink. But what's wrong with her neck? Most likely an insurance policy to make sure she doesn't try to run out on her debt, Hekapoo said with a shrug. Naruto Uzumaki? Ibiki asked, though it sounded more like a statement. Yeah, that's me, Naruto said before the intimidating man handed him a scroll held shut with a red binding in the middle with a bold kanji for C rank. By order of the third Hokage, you are to house and care for 1-star butterfly until the time she finishes working off her debt to Konoha as a probationary genin alongside Team 7. Ibiki said, causing Naruto to stare at him with a lost expression. I knew it, indentured servitude, Marco said with a sigh while Kelly and Tom groaned in realization. Indent what now? Star asked in confusion. In layman's terms, you're a servant that works for free until you work off the debt that you owe. Hekapoo explained bluntly, making Star nod in understanding with a soft, oh. The problem is that while it's a normally fair system to deal with debt, more than a few people have manipulated it into basically enslaving people forever. And given the power you can wield with that wand. The demonic woman trailed off, but Star got the idea loud and clear if the paleness of her face said anything. Say what now? In layman's terms, boy Gaki, your girl Gaki's babysitter for the foreseeable future while she does her community service, Anko said while shoving Star right into Naruto, which sent them both tumbling to the floor. Ha 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 ha. What's so funny, Hekapoo? Marco asked when the scissor maker broke out in laughter. Oh, nothing. Just imaging Moon's reaction if she found out that her little girl was gonna be living with a boy without any adult supervision, she said with a Cheshire grin, laughing even harder when the rest of the group blushed deeply at what she was implying. The full details are in the scroll. If you still have questions, then consult Hokage-sama, the impassive man stated bluntly before vanishing in a swirl of leaves. I late for a date with some dango, so, yeah, what he said, Anko said as she turned to leave but stopped mid-step as she seemingly remembered something. Oh wait, almost forgot. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small brown bag and tossed it on the still downed blondes. Make sure you use those, wouldn't want any more little Gakis running around too soon. Bawahahaha. Oh my stump, I love that woman. Hekapoo laughed uproariously, falling out of her seat as Star's blush went supernova at the insinuation. Marco and Kelly not far behind her, and Tom looked ready to incinerate someone. The purpleette broke out into laughter after saying this before slamming the door shut, leaving Naruto and Star alone as they slowly untangled themselves. Hello again, Star said with a nervous smile as she quickly got up to feet and held her arm out towards Naruto. I'm Star, and I guess we're roommates now. Hey, déjà vu anyone? Marco asked rhetorically with a weak chuckle, trying to change the subject. Thankfully, it worked a bit as Star giggled softly at the reference to how she moved in with him and his family and how he ended up living in the castle with her. Looks like it. Naruto Uzumaki at your service, Titibayo. Make yourself at home. Naruto said with a smile as he shook the princess's hand, much to her surprise. He took that surprisingly well, Tom said with a raised brow. Well, the book did say he was living alone with almost no visitors. Maybe he's just happy to finally have some company. Hekapoo guessed as she finally finished her mug without melting it and swapped it out for a bucket of caramel popcorn. You're not upset that I'm being forced to live with you? Shocked. Yeah. Upset? Not really. I'm sure Hokage Gigi has a good reason for doing this. Naruto said with a shrug as he walked back over to his dining table and quickly downed the rest of his ramen. Besides, he got me this apartment in the first place when I needed a place to live, so I don't mind sharing it with someone else if he wants me to. Though I am gonna give Gigi a piece of my mind later for not giving me a heads up. Meh, that's also a fair reason, the demonic woman said while munching on her snacks. It's really sweet of him, willing to share his home to a stranger like that, Kelly said, mooching a few bits of caramelized buttery goodness. Yeah, especially since said stranger blew him up not even a day ago, Tom added with a chuckle, making Star giggle sheepishly with an awkward smile. Oh, then thank you for having me. Star said happily, glad that this boy was so accepting of her, just like Marco's parents when she first moved in with him as an exchange student. They're very nice people. Star said happily as she remembered the kindness Angie and Raphael had showed her during and after her stay with them. However, her happy mood quickly turned to embarrassment as her stomach gave a loud growl in protest to its emptiness. You wouldn't happen to have anything to eat, would you? Over there in the cupboard, help yourself. Naruto said, pointing to kitchenette as he unrolled the scroll he'd been given. Thanks. Star started to cross the room, but stopped briefly when she felt something squish under her foot. Looking down, she saw the package that Enko had left behind and picked it up with a curious look. Huh, I forgot about that. I wonder what's in it. Star thought aloud, with Tom and Kelly sharing her curiosity. Meanwhile, Marco's face was almost melting from how red it was as he had a very good idea what was in that bag and the square indents on the paper with circles in the middle meant anything. Hekapoo on the other hand was busy having a clone give her the Heimlich after inhaling some of her popcorn when she tried to laugh with her mouth full. However, just as she was about to open it, her stomach rumbled again and she set it down on a nearby table for later as she hurried to where the food was. Oh, thank God. Marco thought with a sigh, glad that Star's counterpart didn't embarrass herself further by opening the bag. God only knows the last thing he needed was having to explain to the somewhat naive princess what a condom was. Pulling the cupboard open, she was greeted with a few boxes of cereal, a couple types of canned soups, fruits, and vegetables, and several styrofoam cups like the one she'd seen Naruto eating out of. What are these? She asked while picking one up, question marks popping up on her cheeks. Instant ramen duh, what else would it be? Naruto said with an incredulous look. What, did this girl not know what ramen was? What's ramen? Am I the only one that feels like Star just stepped on an active landmine? Kelly asked after a short pause as the air was suddenly full of tension. Her answer was a unanimous shake of heads, not that she noticed as her gaze was locked firmly on the TV. What? Star asked as Naruto stared at her blankly for several seconds. Did I say something, Ro-eep? A yelp escaped the girl's throat as Naruto suddenly scooped her up into a bridal carry and leapt out the open window. By the time Star's brain managed to catch up to what had just happened, they were already several blocks away from Naruto's, and now her, apartment as the whiskered blonde jumped from rooftop to rooftop. Star found herself in awe as she saw the village passing underneath her, the light from the setting sun giving the whole place a soft homely glow. Wow, this is way farther than I can jump. She thought as Naruto effortlessly leapt at least 80 feet in the air to make one jump, a feat she'd need to use her magic to duplicate. Boy got some good legs on him, Hekapoo said somewhat breathlessly after she managed to dislodge the popcorn in her throat, coughing it up as a loogie that hit the floor with a soft splat. Meh, I could beat that, Tom boasted, though if you listened closely you could hear a slight ting of uncertainty in his voice. I wouldn't be so sure, that looks like he's moving at a casual pace, Kelly said, her experience with fighting agile opponents allowing her to pick up that small detail. Makes me wonder how high he could go if he really tried. Yeah, cool. Let's focus on that instead of the part where he just grabbed Star and jumped out of a window for no apparent reason. Marco said sarcastically, before rolling his eyes when he was completely ignored. Just as fast as it started though, their journey came to a sudden end as Naruto dropped down into the street and darted into a food stand. Tuchi Gigi. 2 bowls of miso ramen stat. We have a code 0. He yelled, startling the elderly man who was inside as he set Star down on one of the stools. A code 0, huh? I'm on it. The old man, which Star assumed was Tucci, said with a hearty chuckle while quickly getting to cooking. What's the name of the unlucky soul that's never had ramen before? Wow, this Naruto guy must be some kinda ramen fanatic or something if he has a special code just for telling the stand manager that someone never had ramen before. Tom said as a sweat drop dripped down the back of his head. Star Butterfly, it's nice to meet you, sir, Star said with a cheerful wave. Nice to meet you as well, Butterfly-san. Name's Tucci, but everyone just calls me Gigi, Tucci said before pointing behind himself where a lovely young woman with long brown hair walked into view with a bag of flour in hand. And that's my daughter Ayame. Hi Naruto, is this a new friend of yours? Said girl asked after she set the flour down and walked up to the pair. Sort of Ayame Nichan, Naruto said before giving a quick overview of the day's events and even showing them the scroll he'd been given, which basically said the same thing Ibiki did, though with a few additional things added. Like the 2,500 Ryo, 250 United States dollars. He'd get paid every 2 weeks to help cover costs such as food and clothing. That makes sense since he does have to take care of you after all, though hopefully that isn't added into the debt you owe, Tom said to Star, who nodded in agreement to both statements. It also mentioned the exact amount Star had to work off, which both father and daughter couldn't help but cringe at, and how'd she do so by working alongside his team on missions. The last part explained his job of making sure she stayed in Konoha unless on mission, though it was a rather redundant task since a tracking seal had been tattooed to the back of Star's neck, hence why she kept rubbing it tenderly. Thank the stump mom isn't here, she'd freak at the idea that I'd gotten a tattoo, Star said, shivering as her mind conjured up an image of a giant version of the queen standing over a chibi version of herself. Speaking of which, here, this should help a little, Ayame said as she set a wrapped ice pack around Star's shoulders, getting the princess to sigh in relief as the cold numbed the sensitive skin. Thank you Ayame, that feels so much better, Star said as she hugged the brunette in thanks. Order up, 2 miso ramen, on the house for your first visit, Tucci said while placing the large bowls in front of the 2 blondes. I like them, Star said with a smile. Those 2 also reminded her a lot of Marco's parents, with the kind and understanding feel the pair had as they spoke with her counterpart in Naruto. Oh, it looks delicious, Star said, drooling as the smell reached her nose, before looking at the pair of chopsticks she'd been given with a tilted head. Why would someone eat with those? Star asked with a tilted head as she looked at the pair of chopsticks her other self was clumsily holding. That's actually a bit of a historical debate, with some saying it's because they were more aesthetically pleasing than regular silverware, while others claim that it's because they're easier to make with limited materials and ended up catching on. Marco told the princess in the simplest way he could so not to end up with a long drawn-out explanation. Glancing towards Naruto, she watched him break them apart and start ravenously devouring the noodle dish. Mimicking him as best she could, and with a few tips from Ayame once she saw how much trouble she was having, she slowly lifted a clump of noodles into her mouth. K hallelujah sound effect. Okay seriously, where the heck is that coming from? Marco demanded as that same sound effect played through the room. Looks like we got ourselves another regular, Tucci said with a chuckle as Star's eyes and cheek marks turned into sparkles before she started scarfing down her bowl as fast as Naruto. End chapter. Chapter 3. Huddling around Star, the group eagerly read through the profile page of one Naruto Uzumaki. However, after just a few seconds of reading, that eagerness was quickly switched to a mixture of sadness and pity. Naruto Uzumaki age: 13 height, 145 centimeters weight, 40.6 kilograms. Blood type: B. Status: Genin, active, techniques: Kawarmi, Henge, Oryoke no Jutsu, Kage Bunshin. Relatives: mother, deceased. Father, deceased. Orphaned on the day of his birth when the village was attacked by the Kyuubi no Kitsune, Naruto has spent the majority of his life hated by the inhabitants of his home due to being a constant reminder of what they lost. This social stigma only grew worse over the years as the children of the village adopted this dislike for the boy, despite not understanding why he was so hated in the first place. Because of this social isolation, he has very poor social skills and very little understanding of proper mannerisms, thus making him come off as stupid, naive, boisterous and childish. His exuberant and loud demeanor originally started as a mask, a way to hide his desperation for love and affection, but over the years became ingrained so deeply into his personality that he no longer realizes this fact. Despite all of this, however, Naruto has an incredibly optimistic outlook on life, has a strong sense of loyalty towards those he sees as his friends, and is always willing to help those in need. That's so sad," Star said with a sniffle, tears forming in her eyes and her cheek marks turned into raining clouds. Marco, Tom, and Kelly nodded in agreement with the princess, the latter of the three retreating into her long hair slightly to muffle her own sniffling. "Indeed, but that's life for you," Hekapoo said dismissively like she didn't care, but Marco could see the concealed pity hidden in the flame demoness's eyes. "Some people get lucky, others do okay, and more get screwed over, but there's always someone out there that got the really short end of the stick." After waiting a few minutes to let everyone process what they learned, Hekapoo gently pulled the book out of the girl's grasp through a portal and flipped it back to where they left off. "Here, I'll take over the reading for now." "Yeah, that's probably for the best," Tom said while he and Marco collected and threw away the tissues that Star and Kelly had used to blow their noses and wipe the tears off their faces. "Last time, oh, it looks delicious," Star said, drooling as the smell reached her nose, before looking at the pair of chopsticks she'd been given with a tilted head. Glancing towards Naruto, she watched him break them apart and start ravenously devouring the noodle dish. Mimicking him as best she could, and with a few tips from Ayame once she saw how much trouble she was having, she slowly lifted a clump of noodles into her mouth. "K hallelujah sound effect. Looks like we got ourselves another regular," Tucci said with a chuckle as Star's eyes and cheek marks turned into sparkles before she started scarfing down her bowl as fast as Naruto. "Hey, remind me to make you some ramen when we get home," Marco told Star, trying to lighten the mood a bit. It worked somewhat as his best friend smiled softly and nodded in appreciation. "And now, I'm so full," Star groaned, holding her slightly distended stomach as she and Naruto re-entered their apartment through the front door. "That's what happens when you have 25 bowls of ramen in one sitting," Naruto said with a grin, even as he stumbled a bit with his own enlarged gut. "Damn, who knew the princess had such a big appetite?" Hekapoo said with an impressed whistle while said blonde blushed sheepishly. "You think that's bad? You should have seen her when my parents took her to her first all-you-can-eat," Marco started to say, only to be cut off mid-sentence when Star clapped a hand over his mouth, her cheek marks glowing a bright pink. Sadly for her, it was for naught as Marco Simple pulled out his phone and showed the others a picture showing a messy-faced Star seated at a booth with a content smile surrounded by several dozen dirty plates and her stomach stretched out so much that she could be mistaken for being a few months pregnant. Slowly shuffling across the room, the pair flopped down in separate chairs in almost perfect sync. "It's worth it though." "Belch, totally," the princess said as she sunk into her chair with a content look on her face. "Definitely worth it," Star thought with a nostalgic smile, remembering all the tasty earth foods she got to try at that buffet. "So, since we're probably gonna be here for a while, want to hear a funny story?" Naruto asked, getting Star to nod her head. For the next hour or so, the pair had talked and gotten to know each other, trading stories of childhood mischief and adventures. The whiskered blonde himself had shared some of his past pranking exploits, such as the time he spiked the teacher's lounge coffee with laxatives or when he snuck a torn bag of catnip into Kiba's jacket. "Bawahahaha. Oh stump. This kid is killing me," Hekapoo laughed out as several pictures and clips of Naruto's pranking career played across the screen. "He makes Janna's pranks look like simply whoopee cushion gags," Marco said with a chuckle, before paling as a thought passed through his head. "Oh man, I'm really hope those two never meet each other. God knows the last thing she needs is more ideas on how to prank me." Hearing what the Latino boy said, Hekapoo suddenly stopped laughing as a mischievous grin suddenly crossed her lips as she twirled a finger through a lock of her hair. "Now that would be a shame, wouldn't it? Yeah, then I'd never have any peace of mind ever," Marco trailed off as he noticed something glowing above him. Tilting his head upwards, the safe kid's eyes widened upon seeing the flaming portal that now floated in the air directly above his head. Hekapoo, don't you de-oof. He was cut off once more as a Filipino girl with black hair and wearing a grayish-green hat landed on the boy's lap in a perfect sitting position, looking around the room with a casually smirk as she filed her nails. Hey everyone. Hope you all don't mind me dropping in. Hello Jana. Marco groaned, both from his aching lap and the terribleness of his friend's statement. Your puns still suck as badly as ever. I'll admit that wasn't one of my best, but in my defense I only had about 30 seconds to come up with one after I got this little baby here. The now named Jana said with a shrug, scooching into an empty seat while pulling out a small roll of parchment that had, bringing you to see something awesome. Expect portal beneath you soon Hekapoo, written on it. So what's going on? Reading a book on an alternate reality where Star got herself stranded in a locked dimension after breaking her dimensional scissors. Now she's currently stuck with a cute boy who's really good at pranks. Hekapoo said while pointing to the screen where the images of said pranks were still up on display. Grinning widely as soon as she saw these, Jana lifted up a notebook she seemingly pulled out of thin air and started writing so fast the paper began to smoke a bit. You have no idea what you've just done, Marco told Hekapoo in a dead serious tone, getting the flame demoness to chuckle as she flipped the page in the book. No, I know exactly what I've done. That's why it's so funny. Meanwhile, Star spoke about her many different, adventures in Muni and on Earth, like when she mistakenly thought a game of football would be an actual battle. Hey, that one was legit not my fault. Anyone could have mistaken it for a real fight with the way everyone talked about it. Star mumbled with a pout. I'll admit, that one was mostly on me. Marco agreed as he thought it over. Though Naruto was naturally a bit skeptical when she claimed to be from another dimension, even after she showed him the tiny wings sticking out of her back. Though he was pretty close to convinced when she used her wand to turn the simple wooden chairs they were on into plush pink recliners. Alright, it's getting pretty late Star-chan, we should call it a night, Naruto said as he stood up, failing to stifle a yawn as it forced its way out his mouth. Star-chan. Wondering why he wasn't getting a response, Naruto turned his head towards the princess in confusion, before chuckling softly. Star's head was lolled to the side, a tiny trickle of drool dripping from her lips as she quietly snored in her seat. Ah, she's all tuckered out. Kelly gushed while Star flushed lightly in embarrassment once more. Shaking his head humorously, the whiskered boy picked the princess up into his arms, being careful not to wake her up or mess with her wings as he held her in a bridal carry. He then walked over to his bedroom, gently set her down on his bed, and tucked her in as best he could. Once he was done, Naruto shuffled over to a nearby closet and pulled out an extremely dusty futon. Looks like this wasn't a waste of money after all, he thought with a smile, brushing the majority of the dust out the window before undoing the straps holding it shut and allowing it to unfurl on the floor. Reaching back into the closet, he pulled out an equally dust-covered blanket and pillow that he quickly cleaned off before laying down. Yawn. Good night Star. This time Kelly, Star, and Jana gushed as the scene played out on screen. He gave up his own bed so I could sleep comfortably. That's so sweet. Star cooed with a bright smile. Definitely sounds like an okay guy in my books, Jana said. Next day, Training Ground 7, where's that baka? Sakura grumbled, pacing back and forth in a small clearing as she fiddled with her ears, or more specifically the small black patches inside them. These were specifically designed padded covers that limited the amount of air and sound that entered her ears to protect the recently healed and sensitive parts of her inner ear while still allowing her to hear. What happened to her? Jana asked with a quirked brow. Before anyone could answer, the screen switched scenes briefly to show Star's explosive arrival to Naruto's dimension. Not a bad bang. Sucks to be her though. Not far away, a raven-haired boy leaning against a tree with a neutral expression on his face briefly glanced towards the pacing Pinkette before continuing his staring contest with the ground. This was one Sasuke Uchiha, the broody soul remaining loyal member of the Uchiha clan and his class's Rookie of the Year. Okay, honest question here, Jana cut in once again while pointing to Sasuke's head. Am I the only one that thinks his hair looks like a duck's ass? I was thinking more of a goose, but yeah, duck seems to fit better, Hekapoo said with a nod. Meanwhile, the rest of the group just giggled or chuckled at the comparison. The pair had been waiting for half an hour now for both their late hyperactive teammate and Sensei Kakashi. This was actually the norm for the latter though, as he was chronically late for just about everything. Naruto on the other hand was usually right on time, or at worst a few minutes late because he ended up oversleeping. Meh, being on time is for squares. Jana drawled, before looking at Marco with a teasing grin. Ain't that right, safe boy? However, to the girl's surprise, instead of getting offended or defensive at the nickname, the hoodie-wearing teen chuckled deeply with a nostalgic smile. Oh man, it's been so long since I've been called that. I can't believe I used to be such a huge hypochondriac. Did I miss something? The hatted girl asked with a raised brow. You know how Marco has his own dimensional scissors now? Star asked back, getting a nod in response. Well, to get them he spent 16 years playing the world's most dangerous game of hide and seek with Hekapoo in her dimension, which was only 8 minutes for us because of time D, a time dilatation. I'm pretty sure you mean time dilatation, Star, Marco corrected with an amused sigh. The time frame in Hekapoo's dimensions is 1,051,200x faster than our own, or in layman's terms, 1 minute here is about 2 years there. So for me, it's been years since you last called me safe kid. Then shouldn't that make you like 30 years old or something? Jana asked, to which Marco made a so-so motion with his hand. 31.5 to be exact, but I'd aged back to normal the moment I came back to our normal time frame, so I'm technically still 15 physically. Ah, was he hot? Jana asked Star in a whisper, getting a rapid nod in response. You could have grated cheese on his abs. He'd better not be skipping out on us today, because I still need to finish our chat about him blowing out my eardrums. Sakura growled while cracking her knuckles. She didn't know exactly what happened at the hot springs, given she'd been more focused on the piercing pain in her ears and the fact she couldn't hear a thing, but she was certain that it was Naruto's fault. The explosion did happen on his side after all, and he was all alone at the time, so it was the only logical conclusion. She'd given him a piece of her mind at the hospital when he had the gall to act like it wasn't when he checked up on her at the hospital, but had been swiftly stopped by the medic Nin treating her before she could do more than slap him a few times. That does seem like a fair assessment from her perspective, Kelly admitted, since she'd probably come to the same conclusion and have a similar reaction. Add in that he was extremely late for their team meeting, and you have one very angry girl. Hey Sakura-chan. Sorry we're late. Speak of the devil, the pinkette thought as her head snapped in the direction that Naruto's voice came from. Her gaze zeroing in on the whiskered boy, the pinkette clenched her fists tightly as she marched towards him, not noticing the blonde girl next to him due to her anger-induced tunnel vision. This is not going to end well. Marco muttered. Are you kidding? This is gonna be awesome, Jana said with an eager grin as she started munching on some popcorn that Hekapoo gave her. I'm glad that you're here. I was worried that you'd still be at the hops herc. Naruto started to say, only to be cut off by a devastating punch to his face that sent him tumbling backwards. Ooh, the group hissed in sync as the scene played in slow motion on the screen. He's definitely gonna be feeling that one in the morning, Tom said with a sympathetic wince. You're late, Baka. Sakura yelled as she stood over the downed blonde with a raised fist. Can't you read a clock? You were supposed to be. Narwhal blast. Sakura was cut off mid-rant as a wave of miniature narwhals slammed into her gut, knocking her clean off her feet and back several feet until she collided with the tree and now alert Sasuke was leaning against. And she's gonna feel that one all week, Kelly added while Star smiled at how her other defended her friend. Said boy turned his head towards the source of the commotion and saw an unknown blonde girl with hearts on her cheeks worrying over Naruto. Able to put two and two together to figure out she was simply reacting to Sakura's attack on Naruto. Sasuke calmed back down and went back to his brooding, though made sure to keep an eye on the new person just in case. Are you alright, Naruto? Star asked as she helped her fellow blonde back to his feet, her wand still held at the ready towards Sakura. Itai, yeah, I'm fine, Star, don't worry, Naruto said, waving off her concern as he shook his head a few times to clear the ringing. This happens a lot, I'm used to it. How often are we talking about? Marco asked, even though he had a feeling he wouldn't like the answer. A feeling that was proven correct just a second later when a montage of clips played showing Naruto getting punched, kicked, punted, or otherwise hid by Sakura, while Hekapoo showed them a list of times that was in the back. Sheesh, seems like somebody is stuck in jerk mode, Jana said with a frown as she read over the list, or more specifically the reasoning for each incident, which included acting perverted, annoying her by trying to be nice, not knowing something, annoying her with his presence, being a bit stupid. Oh, and did I mention annoying her? But she didn't even give you a chance to explain why we were late in the first place. Star pointed out angrily while jabbing her wand towards the stunned Pinkette. Point to Star, Hekapoo said jokingly while said princess puffed her chest out in mock pride, only to quickly deflate when the dimensional enforcer added. Though it was probably her fault he was late anyway, so minus point. Yeah well, Naruto mumbled, trying and failing to come up with a defense for his crush. Not that he had much time to, since Sakura managed to recover from the surprise blow and get back up. OWWW, what the hell was that? She demanded, a hand clutched to her stomach as she looked around angrily until her gaze settled on Naruto and Star. Staring at the heart-cheeked girl intently, she scoffed before turning towards the whiskered blonde with a dull look. Seriously, Naruto? Are you really so desperate for a girlfriend that you had one of your stupid clones use that ridiculous hench of yours? Okay. That was quite possibly the bitchiest thing I've ever heard, Hekapoo stated blandly. Agreed. Everyone else in the room said at the same time. Anyone else wondering what she meant by one of his clones? Marco asked, only to be ignored as everyone focused on glaring at the Pinkette for her unnecessarily cruel remark. Hey, don't you talk to Naruto like that, Star said with a frown. Oh please, I don't even listen to the original you, why would I do so for a clone? Sakura said while walking forward and jabbing a finger against Star's chest. Just dispel already, would you? Nobody's falling for your little act. A growl building up in her throat, Star's wand started to glow ominously as she started to raise it in order to blast the annoying Pinkette across Konoha, only to be stopped halfway by a hand on her shoulder. Jumping a bit in surprise, the otherworldly princess snapped her head to the side to see a silver-haired man with almost his entire face covered. That girl is lucky. 2 more seconds and she would have been seeing stars of a different variety, Tom remarked with a chuckle. Now there, Sakura, that's no way to talk to your new teammate, the man said in a casual condescending tone, causing said Pinkette to freeze while Sasuke's head perked up in interest. What did you say, Kakashi-sensei? Sakura asked as her head slowly turned towards the now named Kakashi, only to be ignored as the masked man turned his only visible eye towards Star. You are Star Butterfly, correct? That's me, and you must be Kakashi, the magic-wielding girl said with a smile, her mood instantly perking up as she shook his hand. It's nice to meet you, sir. Naruto told me all about you. Not bad. Seems like a pretty chill guy, yet the mask adds just a touch of mysterious intrigue, Jana said while looking the man over approvingly. It's a pleasure to meet you as well, Star-san, Kakashi said with an eye smile before returning his attention back to a still gawking Sakura. I'm sorry, did you say something? Ooh, and a great sense of humor, bonus. Shaking off her shock, the pink-haired girl gave the man a suspicious glare. You're kidding with us, right, sensei? This is some prank that you and Naruto set up, isn't it? Sakura asked in an accusing tone. I assure you, Sakura, this is no joke. See for yourself, Kakashi said with another eye smile as he pulled out a familiar-looking scroll, causing Naruto to blink in surprise before looking down to see his kunai pouch open. Jana, you're drooling, Marco said while wiping his friend's lip with a napkin. I know, but he's worth it, Jana said in an odd tone. Taking the scroll from the silver-haired man, Sakura quickly unrolled it and started reading its contents, with Sasuke joining her a minute later once his curiosity got the better of him. As they took in the writing on the paper though, the former's eyes started bugging out while the latter quickly lost his interest and went back to his tree. No shits given at all by that one, Hekapoo said with a light chuckle. Once she was finished, Sakura slowly rolled the scroll back up before turning towards Star with an awkward cough. I'm sorry, I was incredibly rude, she said as she gave a short bow. While she could have claimed that what was written on the scroll was still bull, the Hokage's seal on the bottom stamped out any doubt in her mind. Apology accepted, Star said with a nod and a smile, though the slight edge in her voice showed that this wasn't entirely true. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly be that quick at forgiving her either, Star stated with a huff. She may be a nice person, but that did not mean she would just act all sweet and sugary towards people who were mean to her friend. So, now that we have that all settled, any particular reason that you two are so late today? Kakashi asked, earning himself a dry look from Naruto that he ignored. That's kinda my fault, Star admitted with a sheepish grin. Called it. Hekapoo said while sending a smirk at Star, who grumbled under her breath. 30 minutes earlier, Naruto's apartment. What the hell, Star? Naruto yelled as he and said princess hid behind his overturned dining table as a giant blob of cornflakes bashed at it with several tendrils. I thought you said you were making the cereal unstale, not bring it to freaking life. I'm sorry. I just used the wrong wording. Star yelled back before popping out of cover and pointing her wand at the breakfast monster. Hard dagger blast. Kinda like the first day you lived with me and you accidentally turned my room into a black hole. Marco said nostalgically, snapping Star out of her pouting as she giggled softly at the memory. Yeah, I'll admit that wasn't my greatest moment. With a ray of pink light, dozens of red heart-shaped blades flew from Star's wand and sliced the blob to bits. However, Star didn't relax one bit despite this, and for good reason as the pieces quickly started swarming back together. I hate blob-type monsters. Those things are always such a pain in the neck to deal with, Kelly said with a sigh. You've dealt with them before? Jana asked, making the greenette nod her head. Yeah, the only way to deal with them is to find their weakness, like how some have to be burned to death or diluted by water. Kelly explained in a drawl tone. Given that this one is made of cereal, I'd say its weakness would be spoons or milk. Darn it, that didn't work either. She grumbled while ducking back behind the table just as a tendril speared through the space she'd been occupying. They'd tried to smash, blast, burn, and now slice the thing to no avail, and Star was beginning to run out of spells that wouldn't cause too much collateral damage, which was the last thing she needed to deal with right now. So all it takes is having a huge daunting debt dangling over your head to make you more careful about causing wanton destruction, huh? Marco asked Star with good-humored sarcasm, while the princess coughed awkwardly. Not true, Tom said as he pulled Star into a one-armed hug, cheering the princess up. It has to be a huge daunting debt that her parents can't cover for her that's dangling over her head. For all of 2 seconds. Pushing the demon prince off with a huff, Star sank into her seat with a pout while Marco and Tom high-fived. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Naruto called out while making a plus sign with his fingers, causing several copies of the whiskered blonde to appear in a puff of smoke that quickly jumped towards the blob. Most of the clones were easily swatted aside and dispelled, but that didn't deter the rest as they got in close and proceeded to punch, kick, or grapple whatever they could. That's not going to hold it for long. Whoa! Look at all the Narutos, Star exclaimed excitedly as she watched the clones swarm the cereal monster. Hee hee hee, Jana giggled perversely with a small trickle of blood running down her nose. So that's what they meant by clones, Marco mumbled, remembering Sakura's earlier comment, not all that fazed by the copies since he dealt with Hekapoo's cloning ability for years, before another thought popped into his head. Hey, why isn't that Star freaking out as well? Because she can't see them, duh. Hekapoo said with a roll of her eye, the screen showing what she meant as it changed to Star's point of view for a few seconds and highlighting the positions of all the clones, which were either hidden by the table she was using for cover or by the tentacles of the cereal monster. That's oddly convenient. Don't worry, I think I got it this time, Star said excitedly, her wand gaining a light blue glow as she popped back out from cover. Freezing winter tund hay. Just as she was about to cast the spell, a single tendril of cornflakes suddenly shot out and snatched her wand from her hand. Give that back, the princess demanded as she tried to catch the wand, only for the tendril to shoot back into the main blob, the wand vanishing inside the cereal monster. Oh! Naruto, we have a problem. Understatement. The entire group said in sync. Great, Naruto muttered as Star crouched beside him. We're going to be killed by a cereal monster, not how I thought my ninja career would end. Yeah, eaten by our own breakfast, talk about irony, Star said with an awkward chuckle that Naruto shared. Wait a second, both blondes suddenly perked up as a crazy idea popped up in their heads at the same time. They're gonna try to eat it, aren't they? Tom asked humorously. Well, it is made of food after all, Hekapoo said. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? Star asked with a grin. Oh, I think I am, Naruto said, smirking as he held up a pair of spoons. "Let's eat," the both exclaimed at the same time as they jumped out of cover and at the monster with their weapons raised. And thus the great breakfast war ended, with the heroes gorging themselves on the flesh of the beast. Jana said in a mock-serious voice, causing the rest of the group to break out in laughter. "Back to present. Man, that thing was delicious," Naruto said with a sigh as he rubbed his stomach. "Yeah, best cereal ever," Star agreed, before holding up a glass jar that she got from somewhere. "We even managed to save some for later." Grabbing the container from the blonde girl, Kakashi held it up to his sole visible eye with a look of interest as he watched the small blob inside thrash around in a desperate attempt to escape. Interesting. If you don't mind, I'll be keeping this. The R&D department are going to go nuts when they see this thing." "Weaponized cereal, part of a balanced breakfast," Hekapoo said jokingly while a picture of said cereal popped up on the screen. I'd buy it," Jana said with a shrug. "No problem, sensei, we got plenty to go around," Naruto said as Star held up another jar, causing a sweat drop to appear on the back of Kakashi's head. "Never hurts to come prepared," Star said sagely, running her fingers in front of her chin like she was stroking a beard. "Right, well then, on to other business," the masked man said while putting the jar in one of his pockets. "Since this is your first official day as a genin, we'll be skipping the D ranks today and going straight to training to see where you stand." "All right. No stupid D ranks today," Naruto cheered, before getting bopped on the head by Sakura. Before anyone could ask, a list popped up no screen showing a list of D-rank types of missions. Babysitting, weeding, dog walking, catch a cat, garbage collection, these are actual missions? Kelly voiced disbelievingly as she read over the list. "This looks more like my house chores." "Yeah, I can see why they'd hate doing them," Star said with a shiver, glad that she wasn't the one who'd have to be doing those. "This screen is so handy, whoever designed it must have been a genius," Jana said with an admiring tone. Elsewhere, Achu, a cute pink-haired girl with a slender demonic-looking tail, sneezed as she and several others watched an older Naruto help a cute blonde girl with transforming hair on a futuristic television that had a large dent on one side. And back with Star and Co. "Stop acting so childish, Naruto," she told him in a mildly berating tone, even though she was doing the exact same thing in her head, not noticing the sour look Star sent her as she returned her attention back to Kakashi. "So what will we be doing, Kakashi-sensei? More team-building exercises?" "I really don't like her," Star grumbled while giving Sakura the stink eye. "Don't be so fast to judge her, Star, maybe she's not as bad as she seems," Marco said to his bestie, only to get more grumbling in response. "Not right now, first we're going to have a few spars, and since I'm feeling gentlemanly, we'll have you two ladies go first," the Cyclops said with an eye smile as he patted Sakura and Star on the head. "Sweet. Let's get this fight going," Star exclaimed while waving her wand, causing her to be enveloped in a brief glow of light. When it faded, the girl's clothes were replaced with slim knight armor with a metal skirt and a spiked helmet, while her wand had turned into a large morning star mace that the princess effortlessly twirled with one hand before resting it on her shoulder. "That's a big mace," Sakura murmured with a nervous gulp as her face rapidly lost all its color. Marco looked towards Jana dully as she played funeral music from her phone at top volume. "Really? Hey, I'm just calling it as I see it." Thankfully for her though, Kakashi came to the rescue as he got in front of Star with a hand held up. "Whoa, hold on, Star-san. I'm glad that you're so enthusiastic, but this spar is going to be just taijutsu for now." "Tai what now?" the armored princess asked with a tilted head, earning herself surprised looks from Sakura and Sasuke, though the latter did a pretty good job at hiding it. "What she said," Star agreed, her expression identical to her counterpart. "It HRCK. Marco tried to explain the meaning of the word but was cut off when Hekapoo tossed a ball of super taffy into his mouth, effectively muffling him for the moment. "He means you have to fight with your fists and feet only, no weapons or powers allowed," Naruto explained. "Oh, okay," Star said as her wand turned back to normal and she tucked it into a sheath that she conjured on her waist before cracking her knuckles with a grin. "That's no problem for me." "Yeah, that's not much of a handicap for a girl who can easily smash through solid brick with a single kick," Marco said, remembering the numerous times Star burst into his bedroom through the wall, usually due to being so excited about something she missed the door. Blushing lightly at the praise, Star smiled happily as she fiddled with her wand. Daddy always said that a good princess should be able to take care of herself with and without a weapon. I like the sound of that. Most princesses on Earth are nothing but pansies who can't even walk in their own homes without a heavy escort, Jana said, earning odd looks from Kelly and Star while Marco, Tom and Hekapoo nodded in agreement. Oh, thank Cammy, Sakura thought with a silent sigh of relief, glad that she didn't have to deal with fighting this girl while she was using that big-ass bludgeon. One trip to the hospital this week was good enough for her, thank you very much. Alright then, just let us get out of the way real quick, Kakashi started as he and Naruto backed up several feet, leaving the two girls alone in the clearing, and begin. Seriously? Jana asked dully as the end of chapter notice cropped up on screen. Man, what a cop-out. I was looking forward to some carnage. Rolling his eyes at the hatted girl's comment, Marco patted her back in mock sympathy. There, I'm sure there will plenty of that next chapter. Before Jana could comment on this, she and everyone else jumped slightly as Love Sentence, Awesome Feeling started playing loudly. The source of the music was quickly revealed a few seconds later when Tom pulled out a compact mirror with a black skull design and flipped it open. Aw crap, I gotta go. Some idiot led a pack of hellhounds into the field of living skeletons. Lady Hekapoo, if you'd please. He swore with a grumble while standing up and rushing towards a portal Hekapoo opened for him. This'll probably take a while, so keep reading without me. Anyone else need to leave? Hekapoo asked once the demon prince was gone. Nope. I'm good. No, I just got here. Good, Hekapoo said with a nod, then let's get back to reading. End chapter. Come on Hekapoo, hurry up. I want to know what happens next, Jana said impatiently as she stared eagerly at the screen. Yeah, hold your warnicorns girl, you can wait a few more minutes, Hekapoo said as she stood at the back of the room stretching, working out the kinks that had started to form in her muscles. A few feet over to her left Marco and Kelly were doing the same whilst Star walked back through a door on the Dimensional Enforcer's right that had a bathroom sign on it. Shortly after finishing the last chapter, these four decided to take a short break to relax, use the restroom, and work out the stiffness they started to feel from sitting for so long. This in turn left poor Jana feeling a bit bored and impatient, given that she'd only just arrived and thus naturally didn't have any of these issues. Luckily for the hat-wearing girl though, the rest of the group finished up with their little rest just a minute later before retaking their original spots while Hekapoo casually flicked the book back open to where they left off. Last time, oh thank Cammy, Sakura thought with a silent sigh of relief, glad that she didn't have to deal with fighting this girl while she was using that big-ass bludgeon. One trip to the hospital this week was good enough for her, thank you very much. Alright then, just let us get out of the way real quick, Kakashi started as he and Naruto backed up several feet, leaving the two girls alone in the clearing, and begin. Seriously? A recount? Why would someone put a recount section in a book? Jana asked with a raised brow. It just didn't make sense to her, since even if someone needed a quick memory jog all they had to do was flip the pages backwards. It's probably just the norm for the dimension this book is based from. You know what they say, different board, different rules, Hekapoo said with a shrug. Meh, fair enough. And now, 2 minutes later, Naruto, Sasuke, and Kakashi's sweat dropped as an unconscious Sakura was carried off on a stretcher by a pair of medic nin. The pinkette had a large fist-shaped bruise covering the majority of the left side of her face and at least 2 teeth had been knocked out. Dom, girl got knocked the fuck out, Hekapoo said with a chuckle. Aw man, another cop-out, Jana exclaimed, pouting as Marco rolled his eyes and patted her back comfortingly. I wanted to see the fight. I guess I went a little overboard, Star said, asked from the middle of the training field with a mixed expression of confusion and satisfaction. The fight, if it could even be called that, had ended almost immediately after it started when Sakura tried to attack Star first and ended up taking an express trip to La La Land via airfist in face. Total silence filled the reading room for a few seconds after this paragraph was read before both Hekapoo and Jana burst out in laughter. Okay. That is so much funnier, the hatted girl yelled between fits of giggles. I kinda feel bad for her, having your teeth knocked out then put back in is not fun at all, Marco said, idly rubbing his jaw as he felt a small rush of phantom pain. Agreed. Kelly said, having briefly lost a few of her own teeth in her spars with Jorby. Meanwhile, Star remained silent with an expression nearly identical to her counterpart. Don't worry Star-san, it was an accident, it happens. Kakashi said with a wave of his hand. However, we'll have to call it a day since I need to go and explain what happened to the doctors and Sakura's parents. With that said, the silver-haired man followed after the medics, pulling an orange book out of his pocket as he went. I can imagine that conversation. Oh hi, excuse me Mr. and Mrs. Pinky, your daughter's in the hospital once again because she pissed off a princess from another dimension. Sorry, Jana said after finally getting her laughter under control. Okay Kakashi-sensei. Tell Sakura-chan I hope she's not too hurt when she wakes up. Naruto yelled, getting a thumbs up in response. I guess that means we got some free time. Well, we could still train on our. Ooh. Now you can give me a tour like you promised, Star cut him off excitedly, grabbing the boy by the collar and bolting away at high speed. Classic Star, I was wondering how long it would take until that happened. Marco said with a nostalgic smile, remembering all the times Star dragged him away to go on an adventure or other such stuff. At first it had been annoying, and no small bit terrifying at times, but as they hung out more Marco came to enjoy Star's impulsive and excitable attitude. Sasuke's simple stood in place with a dull look on his face, before pivoting on his heel and head in the exact opposite direction at the fastest casual-looking pace he could manage. $10 says he's thinking, hell to the no, right now. Hekapoo bet jokingly, getting another round of laughter to fill the air. Whoa. Calm down Star-chan. You don't even know which way you're going. Naruto exclaimed, getting the princess to skid to a stop. Oh, sorry. Got a bit ahead of myself there, she said, rubbing the back of her head with a sheepish smile. It's fine, I did promise after all. Naruto said with a shrug as he regained his bearings and straightened out his jacket. Now let's go, I can't wait to show you all my favorite places and we can get some shopping done along the way. Ah, how sweet, they're already shopping together, Jana Fo gushed before nudging Star's side with a Cheshire grin. So, should we be expecting the wedding invites soon? Not this again. Star groaned as her cheek marks glowed brightly, resting her face in her hands. A few hours later tick, tick, tick. Bored, so freaking bored. One Ino Yamanaka groaned as she stared up at the sky through the open window of her family's flower shop, her head resting on one hand while the other fiddled with one of her ear patches. Boredom, the eternal curse that all sentient beings must suffer through at one point or another. Hekapoo muttered with a sympathetic bow of her head. I wonder why the story jumped to this girl though, we haven't seen her since chapter 1. Marco though, his brow raised in curiosity before shrugging it off. Meh, it'll probably make sense as the chapter progresses. Who's this chick? Jana asked Kelly, given she'd missed the first 2 chapters. Just a side character I think. We saw her briefly near the beginning of the story so all we really know is that she's obsessed with that Sasuke guy and likes gossip. She'd been ecstatic earlier when her team's sensei had given her the day off because of her ear issues. However, after an hour or so, that excitement had quickly worn off when she discovered one crucial detail. She had absolutely nothing to do. Can't go hang out with my friends cause they're all busy with school or training. Daddy left on a mission. Mom's off in Suna getting a rare blossom cactus. And there hasn't been a single customer for 2 hours. Ino thought with a sigh, her finger tapping against her cheek as she tried to think of something to entertain herself with. Now I get what's gonna happen, Jana said, making everyone look towards her curiously. It's a classic anime skit. Gossip-loving teen is bored with nothing to do and just as they are running out of ideas how to entertain themselves something, or in most cases someone, happens to come along that gets their interest. A clothing shop for shinobi but it's really pricey so I never go there, and over there is Yamanaka Flowers, its name kinda says it all. So incredibly wait a second, was that Naruto? Ino thought, snapping out of her stupor of inactivity as her brain finally registered the owner of the voice that was drifting into her partially blocked ears. See? Jana asked rhetorically with a smirk. Yeah I see why the cable bill always shot through the roof whenever you visited my house. Marco retorted, rolling his eyes when Jana just smirked at him, not even bothering to deny his accusation. Turning her gaze towards the source of the talking, The platinum blonde blinked in surprise when she saw the whiskered blonde walking down the street, and to her even larger shock he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was an oddly dressed blonde girl with heart marks on her cheeks as she excitedly looked at everything he pointed out. Both had big grins on their faces as they talked, occasionally stopping to lick at the ice cream cones they were holding. "Ah, now I want ice cream," Star pouted, slightly jealous of her other self. However, it didn't last long as Hekapoo opened a portal with a twirl of her finger which promptly dropped a small tub of vanilla ice cream and a spoon onto the princess's lap, making her cheer happily. Watching the pair walk until they were out of sight, Ino shot up from her seat and bolted out the door, flipping the open sign to closed along the way. "Goodbye boredom, hello new gossip." "Well, that's the end of the shopping district, and thus we have reached the end of our tour," Naruto said in a faux accent as he and Star flopped down onto a bench. "Please remember to not litter and to leave a tip for your handsome guide of the day on the way out." I'd say he's more charmingly cute than handsome," Janice said with a thoughtful expression as she looked the boy over with a critical eye. "Especially with those whiskers of his, makes me want to pet or pinch his cheeks." While no one verbally responded to her statement, both Kelly and Star couldn't help but nod in agreement as they had been thinking the same thing. Aye sir," Star said with a giggle, giving her fellow blonde a mock salute before settling into her seat with a sigh. "Joking aside though, thanks for showing me around Naruto, it was great." "You're welcome Star-chan, I'm glad you like it," Naruto said while taking a long lick of his ice cream. "How could I not, this place is amazing. You have a mountain with faces on it, lovely forests, and most importantly ice cream," the otherworldly princess exclaimed before ravaging the icy dessert in her grasp. "Amen to that," Star said with a smile while shoving a large spoonful of ice cream into her mouth. As this was going on, neither of them noticed that a certain gossip queen was spying on them with a pair of binoculars from inside a conveniently placed bush. "Sheesh, hasn't that girl ever heard of manners before? She's acting just like Naruto," Ino whispered to herself, a frown crossing her lips as she watched the mystery girl splatter ice cream all over herself while Naruto laughed. Stopping mid-bite, Star stuck her tongue out childishly at the screen before going back to ravenously chowing on her frozen dessert, making the rest of the reading group chuckle at the hilarious and somewhat adorable sight. They also look a lot alike, so maybe they're relatives. "Can't fault her for thinking that," Hekapoo said with a nod at Ino's guess. Both had a similar shade of blonde hair, rounded cheeks with unusual markings on them, same eye color, and even had very similar energetic and friendly personalities. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Naruto was actually his Dimensions version of Star. "That's actually a thing?" Marco asked curiously. Naturally, when he'd first seen dimensional scissors be used by Ponyhead, one of the first thoughts that popped into his head was possibly running into an alternate version of himself in another dimension. However, after various adventures across numerous different dimensions, the idea had faded away into the back of his head until now. It is, but the odds of actually running into one is very slim thanks to, well, let's just say you really shouldn't try looking, Hekapoo said seriously, shocking Marco with the slight edge of fear he could hear in her voice. Setting her binoculars down and holding up a notebook she got from seemingly nowhere that had gossip theories written across the front, the hidden blonde flipped it open to a blank page. Pulling a pen out from the ringed spine, she pulled the cap off with her teeth and quickly started jotting things down. A visiting cousin perhaps, that would explain why she needed a tour and her odd clothing, Ino muttered as she wrote. But then Aunt Mai would have told me about her after she was admitted into the village. Her aunt ran the immigration and visitation station at the gates, so anyone who wanted to enter Konoha had to go past her. But she can't be from here, I would definitely have heard of her before if that was the case. "Geez, and I thought you were nosy," Marco said to Jana, who nodded in agreement. "What? She was a nosy person, even she would admit it." Before she could dwell on this thought further, Ino was snapped back to the real world when she noticed her targets starting to move. "All right. That's enough wasting time. We should get home and get all this stuff put away," Naruto said as he stood up, pulling a scroll out of his pocket for a second. Is that it?" Jana asked with a raised brow. "I kinda figured they'd get more than a rolled-up piece of paper." "Maybe it's an order list," Hekapoo suggested, making Jana tilt her head in thought. I guess that makes sense. Ooh, then when we're done we could play a game," or have a movie night, or both? Star suggested, dancing in place excitedly. That sounds great to me, Naruto said with a grin. Wow, talk about working fast. Jana snickered, making Star look at the hatted girl in confusion. I know right, who knew the princess had it in her? Kelly added with a smirk. What are you talking about? Star, your other just asked a boy if he wants to spend the whole night hanging out with her with nobody else around. Marco said, palming his face at the girl's obliviousness. So basically you just asked him out on a date, Jana, Kelly, and Hekapoo exclaimed at the same time, causing Star's eyes to widen in realization while her cheeks glowed bright pink once again. WWB, but I mean, the poor girl stuttered out before snapping her jaw shut and turning away from the three girls. Just keep reading. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go. Star started to exclaim, before yelping in surprise when Naruto suddenly scooped her up into a bridal carry. That yelp then turned into a cheer as the whiskered blonde leapt high into the air and began roof jumping towards their apartment. Oh stump, why me? Star asked mentally as she felt her friend's smirks grow at the sight. Crap. They're getting away, Ino Whisper yelled, stashing her book away as she abandoned her cover to chase after the pair. It only took a few minutes for the two blondes, plus their unknown extra, to cross the village and reach Naruto's apartment building. Not bothering with the door, Naruto hopped straight into the living room through the window. Seriously, am I the only one who knows how to use a freaking door? Marco asked dully. Seriously, almost everyone he knows seemed to go out of their way not to use a freaking door. Meh, doors are for squares, Jana said with a shrug. Setting Star back on her feet, Naruto then pulled out the scroll again and unfurled it across the floor, revealing an odd squiggly drawing. This was a basic storage seal, used to hold a variety of different things for easy transport. Ah, so it's like a video game inventory, Marco said with a nod, referring to how characters could always carry ridiculous amounts of items with them with just a backpack or something. According to the clerk, I place my hand here, then just channel a little chakra into it, and voila. Naruto said happily as the scroll glowed briefly before a large box, a mattress, and a few shopping bags appeared in a puff of smoke. I wish I knew of these things before, just imagine all the ramen I could carry with me. Or candy. Star added idly as both blondes zoned out, drooling as their active imaginations conjured images of such a sight. While everyone else zoned out as well, Jana pulled out her phone and took a few pictures of the seal, already making plans on how she could possibly recreate the handy tool for herself later. Meanwhile, across the street on a rooftop, Ino was once again spying on her fellow blondes, holding up her binoculars with one hand while the other was writing away in her notebook. Okay. Whoever this Star girl is, she is so not just visiting, Ino muttered as she focused in on the box Naruto had just unsealed, her eyes narrowing at the picture of a bed drawn on the side. This definitely supports my theory that they're family though. I mean, why else would anyone willingly live with Naruto of all people? That was so not called for, Kelly said with a deep frown while Jana and Marco nodded in agreement, the trio glaring at the gossip queen for the harsh comment. Hold on guys, don't get all angry with her yet, Hekapoo said as her eyes went over the next line. Wow, that sounded a lot less bitchy in my head, Ino said with a frown, before shaking her head as she focused back on her targets. Oh. Star murmured, her anger fading away after hearing Ino acknowledge her wrong. Well, at least she admitted that was too mean. Snapping out of his ramen fantasy, Naruto moved the bags and mattress to the side before holding up his hands out in front of himself in a cross shape. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Then, to the surprise of both Star and Ino, two copies of the whiskered blonde appeared on either side of the box in a puff of smoke. Holy stump! There are three of you, Star exclaimed with widened eyes, jabbing her finger at the clones as they lifted the box up and started carrying it towards the bedroom. Now that is the reaction I was expecting, Marco said with a chuckle while Star smiled sheepishly. However, before they got more than a few feet, the two doppelgangers suddenly found themselves under assault by the excited princess. Pretty neat, huh? The original asked rhetorically, chuckling a bit as he watched Star poking and prodding the poor clones with sparkling eyes. I thought only Lady Hekapoo could copy herself like this. How long do they last? Can they do everything you can? How many can you make? Star asked rapidly while still continuing her examination. I feel sorry for those clones. Kelly giggled softly. Naruto can make solid clones? Since when? Ino yelled in confusion. Last she checked, Naruto couldn't even do the utmost basic Bunshin no Jutsu, which created illusionary copies of the user to fool enemies. Yet here he was casually doing a clearly more advanced version like it was nothing. That's a good point. Hekapoo, could you possibly look up the answer for that? Marco asked curiously as the reading group turned their attention towards the fire demoness. No need to, these books come with automatic context fillers, Hekapoo said, setting the book down and pointing a small boxed-off section under the recently read paragraph that had text forming inside it. Apparently, Whisker's chakra reserves are so naturally large that he always ends up overcharging the simpler clone technique, while the more advanced version has a much higher chakra requirement that can compensate for the excess power. Huh? Star asked, not understanding what the demoness said. It's kind of like pumping air into a balloon, Star, Marco simplified for her. Whenever he tried to fill the first kind of balloons, they would burst right away because he used too much air. So instead of trying to lower the amount of air he was pumping though, he just got bigger balloons that could handle the pressure better. Ooh, okay. I get it now. Thanks, Marco. You know, I actually don't know. Naruto admitted after thinking those questions over after a moment. He'd only known this jutsu for a few weeks now, and whenever he did use it he generally just spammed it like crazy, with the clones he created getting destroyed or dispelled shortly afterwards. Really? The guy is literally able to replicate himself stump only knows how many times and he's never really given it a full rundown? Kelly asked disbelievingly. It happens more often than you think, Hekapoo said with a shrug, getting the greenette's attention. 9 times out of 10, people overlook such things for a number of reasons, such as being too lazy to find out, or it's just so normal for them that they never even considered it. For example, have you ever bothered to test just how much your little hair dimension can contain at one time? Fair enough. Kelly admitted with a nod. I'm actually kinda curious now that I think about Poof Thunk it. A dull look crossed the whiskered boy's face as Star gave him a sheepish grin while waving the smoke out of her face from the clone she'd accidentally popped. Hee, whoops. Man, talk about bursting under pressure, Jana said, chuckling aloud at her joke while Marco palmed his face once more. Shaking his head with a smile, Naruto walked over to where the clone used to be and picked up the now unoccupied side of the box. Come on, we still need to set this thing up in the bedroom. It'll be a bit of a tight fit, but Mana, what are you doing? He cut himself off when he saw Star rush towards the bedroom with her glowing wand raised. I think I know what she's doing, Marco said with a knowing smirk while Star grinned excitedly. Let me guess, stretching so she'll be ready for that tight fit? Jana asked suggestively, causing the pair to freeze as their faces rapidly turned bright red, with Star's cheek marks practically blinding everyone with how bright they were now. That would be the smart thing. I heard it can really hurt if you aren't. Super Taffy Blast. Star yelled while pointing her wand at Jana, firing a glob of strawberry taffy that went straight into the Filipino girl's mouth, effectively gluing it shut and muting her. Alright then, continuing on, Hekapoo said, her face twitching from how hard she was struggling to not burst into laughter like Kelly, who had fallen to the floor clutching her sides. Instead of answering him, the princess kicked the door open and pointed her wand inside with a wide grin. Glitter Sparkle Bomb expand. She yelled before the magic stick a bright array of sparkling colors blinded everyone. When it cleared, Naruto's jaw hit the floor and he lost his grip on the boxed bed frame, causing it to squish his unfortunately equally stunned clone out of existence. What had once been his somewhat small but cozy bedroom was now a large castle-like 3-story room with Naruto's bed now turned into a 4-poster and all sorts of weapons, plushies, and other such stuff littered everywhere. You know, I've been wondering. Does that spell actually create all that stuff, or does it just summon it all from your room back at Muni? Marco asked, partly because he really wanted to know but mostly to get his mind off what Jana had said earlier. I actually don't know. Star admitted with sheepish smile, silently thankful for the change of subject. I'd have skipped over the explanation part for the spell when I was learning it. Classic Star. The Latino boy thought with a good-natured roll of his eyes as he patted the princess's back comfortingly. What the fuck? He swore quietly, his eyes threatening to pop out of his head as he tried to comprehend what just happened. Meanwhile, Ino accidentally crushed her binoculars and pen in shock as a castle tower suddenly erupted from the side of Naruto's apartment. Yeah, that's about how I felt when I first saw her do that, Marco said, nodding in approval towards the two blondes' reactions. Giggling at his reaction, Star skipped into the room and flopped onto Naruto's transformed bed before looking back at him with a smirk. Pretty neat, huh? These words managed to snap Naruto out of his stupor and he stepped into the room. Neat? Neat doesn't even come close. This is amazing, he exclaimed while swiveling his head around, taking in every inch of the room he could. There's so much room in here, and look at all this cool stuff. There is a lot of neat stuff, but it would be nice if you remembered to clean up every once in a while, Marco stated while giving Star a mild stink eye. Oh come on Marco, are you still mad about that little accident? I said I was sorry, Star said with a huff. I was pulling tacks out of my feet for an hour Star. I know right, Star said as she bounced on the bed like a little kid on a sugar high. I knew you were going to love. Bang 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 bang. How much you wanna bet that's Ino? Jana asked rhetorically with a giggle that Hekapoo and Kelly shared. Both blondes stopped cold as their heads snapped towards the living room, where they could hear something furiously banging against the front door. Who could that be? Naruto asked as he and Star stuck their heads out the bedroom. Only one way to find out, Star said with a shrug before they walked up to the shaking slab of wood. Bang 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 bang. Sheesh, that door looks like it's about to fly off any second, Marco said, a sweat drop running down the back of his head as he watched said wooden slab shake violently in its frame. It's like Star whenever she has a new crazy idea for an adventure. Yeah, hey, Star started to agree only to end up yelling indignantly when she realized what her friend said. Hold your horses, I'm coming, Naruto yelled in irritation. Seriously, what is with people constantly bashing on his door? Didn't anyone know how to knock normally? Pulling the door open, Naruto opened his mouth to give whoever was on the other side a piece of his mind, only to be caught flat-footed when Ino of all people came barging in with a crazed look in her eyes. Before he could recover from his surprise, she grabbed his collar and pulled him right up to her face. Kiss, 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 Jana and Hekapoo chanted jokingly, causing the Marco, Star, and Kelly to chuckle or giggle respectively. You clones. New girl. Castle outside. What the fuck? Ino screamed at the top of her lungs, sounding like she was seconds away from a panic attack thanks to her ragged breathing and shaking form. Man, talk about getting straight to the point, Kelly said once she managed to get her laughter under control, wiping a tear from her eye. What? Naruto asked in a confused and slightly frightened tone, sweat pouring off of his forehead as the gossip queen stared at him intensely with narrowed eyes. I don't blame him, I'd probably be the same in his position, Marco said with Kelly and Star nodding in agreement, the trio shivering at the mad gleam in Ino's eyes. Don't play dumb with me. There's part of a freaking castle sticking hey, Ino exclaimed mid-sentence when Naruto was pulled out of her grasp by Star. Said princess then raised her once again glowing wand towards the crazed gossiper, a spell on the edge of her tongue. Ooh, catfight, Jana exclaimed excitedly, earning an amused look from Hekapoo, a facepalm from Marco, and a pair of confused stares from Star and Kelly. Ooh, catfight? The greenette repeated with a raised brow. It's an earth term for an all-out brawl between two women, Hekapoo explained with an amused roll of her eyes before smirking as she added, and apparently it's something most human males and some females find incredibly erotic. The blushes on Marco, Kelly, and Star's face was so worth the repeated sprays of water to her face. Whoa, easy there, Star, Naruto exclaimed, shoving Star's hands down before getting between the two girls with his arms held out. Would both of you calm down please? Somebody's gonna get hurt if you keep this up. At first he thought his plea had been in vain as the pair continued to glare at each other, and him in Ino's case, but after a few more moments they both thankfully backed off. Oh come on, Jana yelled, startling the group as she tossed her popcorn at the screen. Stop with the freaking cop-outs already. I want to see some action. What's up with her? I've never seen her so worked up before, Star whispered to Marco as she glanced nervously at the fuming Filipino girl. She just hates when movies cop out on action scenes, or in her words, they're leading you along just to sucker punch you in the gut with a big fist of disappointment, Marco whispered back. Taking a few deep breaths to help herself calm down, Ino shook her head before offering Naruto and Star an awkward smile. Ahem. Wow, sorry about that. I kinda went a little nuts there, didn't I? Massive understatement, Kelly stated with a chuckle. Just a little bit, Naruto said with a roll of his eyes. Now mind explaining the sudden visit, or better yet, how do you know where I live? 'Cause she just stalked you all the way home. Most of the reading group thought in sync. Oh come on Naruto, it's me. I know everything that's going on in this village, you know that, Ino said with a scoff. No, the only things I know about you is your family runs a flower shop and that you like to punch me in the face while calling me an idiot. Naruto said dully, causing the gossip queen to blink in surprise. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is the only time we've ever actually talked to each other. Wow, now that was a shutdown, Jana said, whistling lowly in approval. He's kidding about that punching part, right? Star asked with a frown, not liking the idea of a friend of hers. Even if it was in another reality, dimension, other bullshit sciencey stuff, being beat up like that. Well, if Sakura's reaction is to base on anything, he probably isn't, Marco said, making Star's frown deepen as her grip on her wand dramatically tightened. What? No, what about when? Ino started to say as she tried to recall any interaction she'd had with her fellow blonde, only to end up trailing off as she ended up draw one big fat blank. Well except for, well, looks like we're about to find out, Kelly said as the screen gained a grainy, old-style filter that indicating a flashback. Mini flashbacks classroom. Naruto Baka, Ino yelled as she punched Naruto out of his seat. She then proceeded to take said seat and get into an argument with Sakura who was in the seat right next to her. Outside Ninja Academy Naruto was happily eating his lunch underneath a tree when Ino's fist suddenly collided against his face, sending him tumbling away. Move it Baka, she yelled before plonking down where he had been, which happened to be a few feet away from Sasuke. Yamanaka Flowers Naruto walked up to the counter with a bonsai Sakura, something he was planning to give Sakura for her birthday tomorrow. However, the moment he got close Ino punched him straight out of the shop without looking up from her fashion magazine while muttering, Baka, under her breath. End flashbacks, I have no words. Kelly muttered as those three clips, along with many, others played across the screen one after another. That is just ridiculous. Most of the time he isn't even doing anything to bother her. Is his mere presence that annoying to her or something? Jana asked, not having a witty remark or funny retort for once. I don't like her, Star said through gritted teeth, her wand audibly creaking from how tightly she was gripping it. I really don't like her. Okay, you have a good point, Ino admitted with a sheepish grin. Anyway, I heard that there was girl living with you now and I came over to meet her. Then I saw a castle tower grow out the side of your apartment and everything is a blur after that. Oh yeah, let's just casually gloss over years of cruel physical abuse and act all chummy, doesn't that sound great? Kelly asked sarcastically with a roll of her eyes. Yeah, that threw me for a loop too, Naruto said while nodding his head in understanding. Well, since you're already here I'll explain the whole story. Do you mind helping us set up a bed while we talk? I was joking. Kelly yelled at the blonde on the screen. Seriously, why would you want to hang out with her after all that? Maybe he's just a nice guy like that, Marco suggested with a shrug. Marco, she punched him in the face just so she could have the spot he was sitting in for lunch. Not even you are that nice, Jana said dully. I'm with her. Sounds more like he has a mild case of abuse dismissal disorder, Hekapoo stated with a frown, earning confused, curious looks from the other people in the room. Abuse dismiss what now? Star asked what everyone was thinking. It's a mental disorder found in people who deal with frequent mild assaults throughout their life, usually starting from a young age, which makes them develop a belief that such abuse is normal and thus, as the name suggests, dismiss it afterwards without much thought. The fiery dimensional enforcer explained, making Star scowl deeper. Oh man, I've never seen Star so angry, Marco thought nervously as he slowly scooched away from his not so silently growling friend who looked like she was one step from blasting the screen into next year. Kelly wasn't much better as he could see the greenette reaching into her hair and grasping the handle of her sword. At least Jana and Hekapoo are still acting somewhat sane. The former looked annoyed, but he was pretty sure that was mostly towards the constant cop-outs, and Hekapoo just seemed mildly irritated. Sure, Ino said with a shrug, not seeing a problem with it. And so, once again Naruto and Star went through the series of events that had transpired which resulted with the latter living with the former. Naturally, Ino was stunned by the new bedroom when she saw it herself, spending a good long while gawking over every inch of it. She was also just a bit peeved when she put two and two together and realized that it was the princess that had caused the explosion at the hot spring, though she was quick to forgive once it was pointed out to be an accident. Well, at least that won't be a problem, Marco said with a weak grin in hopes of breaking the current mood. It worked a little as Star's expression softened a bit while Kelly let her sword recede back into her hair. However, this ended up causing another thing that Ino was curious about to pop into the front of her mind. How the hell are both of you perfectly fine? I have to wear these things for at least 2 more days, and I was on the other side of the hot spring. You guys were literally in the middle of the explosion, Ino said, pointing at the patches in her ears as she held a pink headdress with a butterfly hole carved in the middle in place while Naruto and Star lined up the frame and foot of the bed. We've already been over that. Star got lucky with magical protection and Naruto has a healing factor. Janna muttered with a bored roll of his eyes. Dimensional scissors have an enchantment that prevents the user from being harmed mid-transport, Star said as she clicked her side into place, that being one of the many facts she learned while studying how the scissors worked. And I just heal fast, I was all better before we reached the hospital, Naruto said while doing the same, before frowning when Ino gave him a disbelieving look. What? You honestly expect me to believe that you simply healed from an explosion, in your face, all by yourself, in just a few minutes? The Gossip Queen asked incredulously. Stop trying to act cool, Naruto, and just tell me what the hell are you doing? Naruto, Star yelled as said whiskered blonde pulled out a kunai from his weapon pouch and used it to make a small cut on his palm before holding it out towards Ino. Both girls then watched in shock as the injury stitched itself back, and in less than a minute was completely gone. Dang, that is one hell of a way to prove a point, I like it, Janna said with an approving nod. Believe me now? Naruto asked rhetorically as he wiped the blood off on his pant leg, getting a weak nod in response. Good, now let's get the mattress in here, otherwise we won't be able to do movie night. Oh right, I almost forgot about that, Star said excitedly, grabbing Naruto as she ran to the living room, seeming to have forgotten that her new friend had just sliced open his hand to prove a point. Only you, Star, only you. Marco chuckled while Star snapped out of her anger and smiled sheepishly. Ino wasn't so lucky, but thanks to her clan training and mental fortitude, which she totally didn't forget earlier, she was able to shake it off quickly. Sheesh. First he can make solid clones and now he can heal ridiculously fast. What else do I not know about you, Naruto? If there was one thing Ino really hated, it was not knowing something about someone she knew. It spoke badly of her status as Konoha's queen of gossip. Sure, she respected other people's right to have secrets. Most of the time, the fact Naruto had been so open with such facts meant that they weren't exactly secrets to begin with. Dad was right. I really do tend to judge and dismiss books by their covers, she thought with a sigh as she watched Naruto and Star waddle through the door with the mattress in hand before going over to help them. Meh. Everybody does that every once in a while, Janna said casually, getting Star to nod her head slowly as she thought about her own previous bias-filled opinions on the monsters that lived in Muni. It only took a few minutes to finish up the bed and get the bags, which had food and new clothes for Star, put away. During that time, Ino and Star chatted more and to the former's surprise ended up hitting it off rather well. So well in fact, that the Gossip Queen even ended up agreeing to stay for the impromptu movie night. It's not like her parents would mind since they were both out of the village. Hey, see Star, she can't be that bad if you get along with her, you are a rather good judge of character, Marco said with a smirk, before sweat dropping when the girl simply fell back into her seat with a pout and grumbled inaudibly under her breath. Now here she was, sitting back in a fluffy pink recliner with a table full of different snack and ramen, munching on a few chips as she waited for Naruto, who was in the bathroom, and Star, who was fiddling around with the large mirror in the bedroom for some reason. Maybe she's actually trying to get it to reflect something properly, she thought with a giggle. When she'd tried to check herself out in it earlier, her reflection had been extremely blurry and the words, "No service," blinking in the corner. Of course that thing wouldn't work, Hekapoo said with a roll of her eyes. Communication mirrors use transdimensional magic to work, something she'd helped set up, so of course it wouldn't work in a locked dimension which blocked such magic. Creak. Huh. Ino's head jerked to the side instinctually when she heard the sound of groaning wood but didn't see anything. After a few more seconds of nothing, she shrugged it off as just one of the other residents and settled back into her seat, shivering a bit as a breeze grazed her side. Sheesh, I really need to chill before I start to jump at my own shadow. Huh, that was odd. Marco thought as his brow rose, his many years chasing after Hekapoo and his natural OCDNES's nagging at him that something was off with this scene. And he wasn't the only one, as both Kelly and Hekapoo gained mildly suspicious looks as well. What about your shadow? Naruto asked as he and Star walked into the room. Nothing, just thinking aloud. The Gossip Queen said with a wave of her hand. So what are we gonna watch? Nightmare in Uramu no Tochi 3. Dream Warriors. Naruto said, turning the TV and putting a tape in the VCR before grabbing 2 bowls of ramen and handing one to Star as he flopped down next to her. Huh, that sounds familiar for some reason. Jana muttered, rubbing her chin in thought before snapping her fingers as the metaphoric lightbulb lit up in her brain. Oh, Nightmare on Thumbao. The Filipino girl yelped in pain as a book, coincidentally, fell off a nearby shelf and conked her on the head just before she could finish what she was saying. Oh, good choice, Ino said with a nod as she stuffed a few more chips into her mouth. Not as good as the first one, but definitely better than the second. Yeah, they really cheaped out on Return to Uramu no Tochi. Naruto agreed with a shake of his head while taking a bite of his ramen as the movie started. As soon as the noodles touched his taste buds though, the whiskered blonde paused with a confused look. What the heck? This ramen is sweet. Really? Star asked before taking a bite of her own. How weird, maybe I accidentally used sugar instead of salt. Hey, kind of like that time you accidentally used ground jalapeno instead of cinnamon when you were making muffins. Marco said with a nostalgic chuckle while Star laughed and scratched the back of her head. Oh yeah, I remember that. She gave them to our whole class and everyone was freaking out for hours from how spicy they were. Jana exclaimed as she burst out into a fit of giggles. Yeah, that's probably it. Naruto said with a shrug, eating a few more bites before putting the bowl down. Ramen lover he may be, but he wasn't really a fan of the sweetness in this one, unlike Star who quickly wolfed down her bowl then Naruto's in just a few seconds. After that the trio fell into a comfortable silence as they enjoyed the movie, only broken by the occasional scream of fright from Star during particularly scary moments. However, as the night drew late, the princess became increasingly uncomfortable, and it had nothing to do with the film. Wait, what? Marco asked upon hearing that sentence as the humor in the room abruptly vanished. Her stomach was starting to ache, she kept feeling an odd crawling sensation under her skin that she couldn't help but scratch it, and there was this odd pressure-like sensation in the back of her throat that was vaguely familiar to her. What's happening to her? Kelly asked with a worried look on her face. I don't know, but I doubt it's anything good, Marco said, frowning as he felt a faint tickle of recognition in the back of his head. Upset stomach, phantom crawling sensation, why do those seem so familiar? It hadn't been too bad when it had first started, just a minor annoyance that she could easily ignore. But over time it had become increasingly worse, to the point that when they were near the end of the movie it was almost unbearable. She did her best to hide this, however, as she didn't want to ruin the night for them by complaining. Such a task wasn't too hard as both Ino and Naruto were too engrossed with the movie to notice her discomfort much, and when they did easily bought her excuse that it was just the film itself putting her on edge. Star, sometimes you are just too nice for your own good, Kelly said with a shake of her head. Thanks? Said Princess said questioningly, not sure whether that was a compliment or not. Just as the main protagonist was about to finally defeat the ghostly monster Freddy Krueger once and for all. Or at least until the next sequel, though, she ended up figuring out what that feeling in her throat was the hard way. Oh stump, I think I'm gonna, Blue Star groaned as she tried to stand up, only to end up collapsing as she started vomiting all over the floor. EEWWWW, everyone in the room exclaimed as they watched the other Star UP chucking. Star-chan. Star-san. Naruto and Ino yelled in alarm and confusion while rushing to their feet to help the poor girl. Before Naruto could take more than a single step, however, he stopped as a strong sensation of vertigo flooded through his senses, blurring his vision, knocking the wind out of him, and destroying his sense of balance. What's going on? He demanded groggily, shaking his head as he tried to go over to Star and Ino, which only resulted with him stumbling around in a drunken-like manner. That's what I'd like to know, Star said, her face slightly green and her cheek marks turned into biohazard signs. What are you doing, Naruto? This is no time to goof around, Ino yelled angrily, rubbing the princess's back as she dry heaved. I'm not goofing around, something's wrong, crash, Naruto screamed as he lost his footing altogether and fell onto the snack table, causing Ino to flinch. Ooh, that had to hurt, Kelly said with a sympathetic wince, especially since the boy smacked right into it face first. Before she could go over to check if he was alright though, her attention was drawn back to Star when said girl gasped in shock. No, this is impossible, this can't be happening, not again. Star muttered between breaths, her eyes wide with confusion, shock, denial, and fear as she stared at her arms. What's wrong, Star? Are you sick? Did you eat something you're allergic to? Ino asked worriedly, only to be ignored as the princess continued to mutter to herself. Looking down to see what was causing her to freak out so much, Ino blinked in surprise as she saw purple hearts. Silence filled the room as everyone stared at the end of chapter 4, displayed in bold letters. Not a word was spoken nor did anyone move as they tried to process what they just saw. Finally, after several minutes of this, Star snapped out of her daze and all but ripped the book out of Hekapoo's grasp. End chapter. Chapter 5. Flipping the book to the chapter, Star skipped right past the recount section in her rush to find answers for what was happening. The Hokage had a deep frown across his face as he marched into Konoha's hospital, not even reacting when the nurse at the front desk nervously bowed to him when he passed. Going through several hallways at a surprisingly fast pace for a man of his age, the elderly leader soon arrived at a door with two Anbu blocking the way. Yeesh. Those guys just scream, "Don't mess with me," Janna muttered with a small shiver upon the masked ninja coming into view on screen. Well, no duh, they're essentially the Black Ops group of the place, Hekapoo stated calmly, though her furrowed brow belied her concern. Though that begs the question, how bad are things if they need elite soldiers to act as bodyguards? Gulping slightly at the possibilities that came to mind, Janna couldn't help but nod in agreement. Good point. As soon as he got close, the masked men moved out of the way with a salute, allowing him to through. Waving them down as he opened the doorway, Hiruzen found himself standing in an observation area with a pair of doctors milling about checking equipment or looking through the thick glass wall into a containment room holding Star, Naruto, and Ino. Wow, they really went the whole 9 yards. Marco muttered impressed as the containment room was shown, though he soon frowned upon noticing the oddly convenient light glare that prevented them from seeing the three inside. Turning his head to Hekapoo, he pointed his thumb at the screen with a dull expression. That's intentional, isn't it? Yep, the Dimensional Enforcer said with a nod. It prevents any spoilers while the story is being read. Should go away in a second or so, just watch. The room was almost entirely bare, with the only decor consisting of a trio of beds and heart rate monitors. Ino was sitting in her bed with a mixture of boredom and nervousness written across her face as she read a fashion magazine while Naruto was kneeling next to Star's bed with a worried expression as he rubbed the girl's back comfortingly. Both of the former blondes appeared to be just fine, but the princess was another case altogether. Most of her face and hair had turned a dark violet color along with almost her entire body and even her clothes. The iris and pupil of her left eye had turned into a solid lavender heart shape, and 4 extra arms had grown from her chest. Sure enough, just like Hekapoo said, the glare faded away to reveal all 3 blondes as they had been described. Upon looking up at the screen for herself, Star dropped the book in shock as she saw her other self's condition, her jaw hanging wide open while her eyes threatened to pop from her skull. I'll just take that back now, Hekapoo said while opening a portal underneath the dropped book and another in front of her, causing it to fall into swipe. Janna's grasp as she grabbed the book before the fire demoness could. Blinking briefly in surprise, Hekapoo's gaze snapped from her empty hand to Janna as the girl settled in her spot between a nervously sweating Marco and Kelly with a smug smile, before shaking her head with a chuckle. Not bad, little girl, not bad. I have my moments, the Filipino girl said with a casual shrug, before flipping the book back open to the last page they were on. Her wings were quintupled in size, forcing her to lay on her side, and several piles of translucent purple hearts lay across the bed while many more formed and peeled off Star's body every second. All that aside though, the girl herself seemed to be feeling a bit better, though she looked absolutely exhausted and slightly nauseated. "Did you hear that, Star? Your other self is doing better, that's good," Marco said with a small smile while Star snapped out of her dazed state. "Yeah, but that doesn't change the fact she's still going through puberty again somehow," the energetic blonde said, her gaze never leaving her other self's form. Seeing Hiruzen enter, the two doctors stopped what they were doing and bowed respectfully. "Hokage-sama. I received a message that you'd figured out what we're dealing with," the elderly man said, getting a pair of nods in response. "All right then, how bad is it?" "Not horrible but not great either," the first doctor, a generic-looking male with brown hair, said. "The good news is it's not a disease or virus like we feared, so there is no worry of infection." "Figured as much, otherwise that Ino girl would have been showing symptoms as well," Hekapoo said with a nod of agreement, having seen more than enough dimensions where deadly outbreaks had occurred. "And the bad news?" Hiruzen asked before accepting several test results from the second doctor, an equally generic-looking woman with black hair. "We found refined Sukiakara, moonlight lily, extract in both Butterfly-san and Uzumaki-san's bloodstream and stomach contents." "Oh, of course, she was poisoned. How did I not see that earlier?" Marco exclaimed, palming his face with a loud smack as the metaphoric lightbulb lit up in his mind. That's why her symptoms were so familiar earlier. Over the course of his trial to get his own a pair of dimensional scissors, Marco had to gamble a few times with local plants and animals as his dinner to avoid starving. While he'd always been smart enough to only try this in very small amounts to start, it had still resulted in more than one occasion of poisoning himself. "Okay, now we know what happened, all that's left is the how it did, why it did, and who did it," Hekapoo said while rubbing her chin in thought. "Well, this next part seems to have the first one," Janna said as her eyes went over the next paragraph. "Sukiakara. Are you sure?" the Hokage asked, his frown deepening as he read over the contents of the folder. Sukiakara extract, also known as Amai Suimin, sugary sleep, was a rare but extremely potent sedative capable of affecting even Jinchuritsuki. "Positive, sir, and based on their and Yamanaka-san's testimonies, we believe that it was laced into their food just before they started eating," the female doctor explained. "We've informed the Anbu and they did a full sweep of the apartment." "Ah, I get it, the sweetness of the ramen earlier was caused by the poison and not Star's bad cooking," Hekapoo said as it clicked in her head. "Hey, there is nothing wrong with my cooking. Well, it would explain why Naruto was stumbling around like a drunken St. Patrick's Day, but why would a sedative make Star go into puberty?" Marco asked, ignoring his friend's indignant cry. "Only one way to find out," Kelly said with a shrug before everyone turned their attention back to the screen as Janna continued reading. "Good work, though this does not explain Star-san's condition," Hiruzen said while setting the files down. "Actually it does, sir," Guy Doctor said to the elderly man's surprise. "Explain." "Yes, please do," Star said while sending Janna a hurry up look, making the Filipino girl roll her eyes at the princess. "Geez, chill, I'm reading." "Well, read faster, as I'm sure you are aware, sir, Butterfly-san isn't human," Lady Doctor stated, handing Hiruzen several more files. "Externally she looks identical to one, with the exception of her wings, but internally and genetically is a whole other story. Her heart is half the size of normal, she has only one kidney naturally, her liver is where the other kidney should be, the lungs. We'll have a full report sent to R&D later," Guy Doctor cut off his companion's rambling. "Wow, the more you know, huh?" Janna muttered with a slightly surprised expression. She knew Star wasn't human, sure, but she'd honestly never really thought that she'd be that much different given how similar her kind looked to humans. "But to get straight to the point, because the patient's biology differs so much from our own, the Sukiakara caused a dangerous allergic reaction in her. That in turn has forced her to start undergoing this change, which from what she's told us and what we've gathered so far is simply her body fortifying itself." "Ah, I get it now, the drug was meant for humans not mumans, so instead of knocking her out it made her sick," Kelly said with an understanding nod. "And since the damage is being done internally, Star's body must have forcefully induced a second puberty, since that is when a muman is at their strongest physically," Hekapoo added as she thought it over carefully. Nodding his head in understanding as he finished reading the test results, Hiruzen turned his attention back to the isolation room where Naruto was now helping Star drink some water. Will she be alright then? Hi Hokage-sama, we already flushed the Tsukaikari out of Butterfly Sand's system and she should revert back to normal once she has physically recovered from the drug's poisonous effects. In fact, we were actually getting ready to discharge her. Lady Doctor said with a nod. Oh, that's a relief. Star said with a sigh, visibly relaxing upon hearing that paragraph. I told you there was nothing to worry about. You're way too tough for something like this to keep you down. Marco said while patting the girl's shoulder comfortingly, earning a small appreciative smile in response. Already? The Hokage asked with a raised brow. Would it not be wiser to wait until she has changed back? We've done all we can for her here, sir. All she needs now is lots of fluids and rest. Guy Doctor explained. Besides, given the evidence we've found, I believe it is unwise to leave her in such a public location for a prolonged period of time. Wait, wouldn't being in public be a good thing? Kelly asked, her brow raised in confusion. I thought being by yourself when someone was after you was the bad idea. Depends on the situation mostly, but in this case you'd be wrong, Hekapoo stated to the long-haired girl. Whoever tried to drug Naruto and Star's other self was incredibly stealthy, and it's a lot easier to blend in with the surroundings if there are several people around to mingle in with. Understanding what the doctor was hinting at, Hiruzen nodded his head as he set the files down and turned to leave. Very well then, but make sure that there are at least 2 Anbu tailing them when you do so. He wished he could stay longer, but he had work to do. Tsukaikari was grown and made exclusively in Konoha and used only by the best of the hidden village's Anbu Corps, which meant only one thing. There is a trader or traders in my village. Yeah, that one is kinda obvious. Janna drawled out in a bored tone. Star's other had only been in the village for 3 days now, so the only ones who could have tried something like this was someone from the village itself. Unknown location inside a small cave-like room lit up by a solitary lamp. A solitary old man with short black hair and most of his face covered in bandages and one arm in a sling sat behind a plain wooden desk with a calm contemplating look, not even blinking when a man wearing a plain porcelain mask with the kanji for root on the forehead appeared before him in a static blur. Wow, that guy just screams, creepy evil jerk, Kelly said with a shiver, getting nods and mutters of agreement all around. No kidding, just looking at him reminds me of Toffee. Marco thought as he stared at Danzo intently, frowning as he could swear he saw an outline of the Septarian superimposed over the old man. Danzo-sama, my mission is completed, the masked man said with a bow before setting down a scroll on the now named Danzo's desk. Despite the setbacks, I was able to acquire everything you requested. The bandaged man didn't say a word as he reached out with his good arm and unrolled the scroll, revealing a storage seal in the center of the parchment. Placing his palm in the middle of this seal, it lit up with a soft blue glow before expelling a small puff of smoke. When it cleared, there now sat a vial filled with blood, another vial with a swap inside it, a tuft of blonde hair, and a small bag filled with familiar purple hearts. Is that? Star tried to ask, an incredibly disturbed expression on her face. Yep. Hekapoo said with a scowl while her fingers twitched from the urge to blast at the man on the screen to ash. She wasn't the only one either as Marcos clenched his fists. Kelly pulled the handle of her sword partially out of her hair, and Janna looked one step from tossing the book at the projector. Examining these items with a critical eye, Danzo let the smallest of smiles cross his lips for a moment before returning back to his neutral expression. You have done well. However, your original failure has drawn attention and that is still inexcusable. You know the consequences for such a mistake. Of course, Danzo-sama, the masked man said, drawing a kunai from his hip pouch and slitting his own throat with it. What the absolute fuck? Janna swore as she and everyone else stared at the screen in complete horror, not even noticing as the book slipped from her grasp and falling to the floor with a loud thump for the second time that day. Danzo didn't even bat an eye as he watched his subordinate commit suicide without even a second's hesitation, simply watching until the man was completely dead before waving his hand, causing 2 more identically dressed men to appear at either side of him. Use him for the mole contingency, that should throw Hiruzen off our scent for the time being. Hi Danzo-sama, the 2 men said before dragging off their deceased comrade, leaving the old man alone once more. Once they were gone, Danzo picked up the vial of blood once more and held it up to the light with an intrigued look. The blood of a being from another dimension. The secrets you hold will no doubt be quite intriguing. Oh stump, I'm gonna blare, Star started to say before puking her guts out into a nearby trash can, completely unnerved, disgusted, and creeped out by what was happening. Acting fast, Marco grabbed the girl's hair to keep it out of the way before gently rubbing her back in a slow circular motion. Oh geez. Jana, can you get some 7 down and bread please? Also some tissues? Way ahead of you, safe boy. The Filipino girl said as she popped up at his side with said items in hand, passing them over to the Latino boy while taking over holding Star's hair as she continued to vomit. After her stomach was completely devoid of its contents, and several minutes of painful dry heaving, the princess gradually calmed down and settled into her seat while Marco wiped away the small amount of puke trailing from her lips and the tears on her cheeks with the tissues. Once he was done, the Latino boy popped open the can of soda in his grasp and held it up to his friend's lips, gently coaxing her to drink the carbonated beverage, then offering her a slice of plain bread. Feel better now? A little bit, Star admitted quietly in a slightly raspy voice as she nodded her head slowly. Good, then we can get back on track, Jana called out as she settled back into her seat with the book in hand. Jana, I don't think that's a go. It's all right, Marco, let her continue. Star cut Marco off when he started to protest. Are you sure? We could always take a break, the safe kid said, concern clear in his voice and gaze as he placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. Yeah, I'm sure, the princess said with a nod before looking towards the blank screen. I want to know what happens. All right then, Marco said reluctantly while signaling for Jana to start reading again. Outside the hospital, 1 hour later, fresh air at last. Naruto sighed as he, Ino, and a completely transformed Star walked out the front doors. Oh thank God, a scene change, Marco thought with a relieved sigh. However, his elation quickly faded as he turned towards his now purple friend with concern as she leaned against him for support. I know right, that stale chemical smell was starting to drive me nuts, the princess said with a tired smile, her legs wobbling a bit as she walked. Are you sure you're good to go, Star-chan? You still seem pretty sick, Naruto said worriedly. Yeah, I'm with him. She looks like she can barely stand right now, Kelly said as the group watched Star's other self hobbling out of the hospital. You heard the doctor, Naruto. I'm fine, Star said with a nonchalant wave of her hand. I just need a nap and some water. Still, maybe we should stay a bit longer, and Naruto trailed off as Ino gripped his shoulder. Relax, Naruto, the doc said. Star-san's okay, so I'm sure she is, the platinum blonde told him reassuringly, though it wasn't very convincing since she was continually sending her own concerned glances at Star from the corner of her eye. All we can do is follow, they say, and hope they're right. Given they just admitted to knowing pretty much nothing about Star's anatomy a minute ago, I am not comforted by that at all, Marco muttered under his breath while staring at other Star in concern. Being the only one to hear what he said, Star smiled slightly and gave the hooded teen a one-armed hug in appreciation for his concern. Fine, Naruto agreed reluctantly. Good, now if you two will excuse me, I need to get back home and make sure the store's doing okay, Ino said before she ran off, turning around briefly to wave goodbye. Hope you feel better soon, Star-san. I'll be over tonight to see how you're doing. Looking forward to it, Ino, Star called back happily with a wave in return until Ino was no longer in sight. Now come on, Naruto, let's get home already, we still have to finish movie night. Oh yeah, she's fine, Jana said with a chuckle that spread through the room, everyone cheering up at seeing Star's usual optimism. Like there was any doubt, that girl could have a castle dropped on her head and would still somehow find a way to walk it off, Hekapoo said with a roll of her eyes. Unable to help himself, Naruto smiled at the transformed girl's happy attitude as they continued along. All right, Star-chan, since you insist. Star didn't say much else as they walked, mostly because she was still pretty worn out from the Tsukaikari wreaking havoc in her body, though that wasn't much of a problem as Naruto more than made up for it as he told her about the various other movies he had. A quiet star? Now that is something I'd pay to see, Marco said with a chuckle, earning himself a playful punch to the shoulder from said princess as she giggled as well. They tried roof hopping briefly but ended up going the long way instead when Star's stomach decided to do a few backflips each jump. However, as they walked, the otherworldly princess started to feel an odd, dreadful prickling sensation on the back of her neck, one that she'd never felt before but had been told of by her father many times. "Oh, this can't be good," Hekapoo groaned as everyone's moods dropped right back down. Mini flashback. Remember Star? All human are born with a natural sixth sense, one that warns us when there are those nearby who wish us ill will. A short, stout man with long blonde beard said seriously to an adorable toddler-aged Star, who was hanging on to the man's every word with odd eyes. "So if you ever feel a sense of sudden prickling along your neck, be very wary, okay?" "Okie dokie, Daddy," little Star said cheerily, her young mind not understanding the seriousness of her father's words. Mini flashback end. You know humans get that feeling too, though it also occurs whenever something bad is about to happen, Jana said after reading that paragraph. "Seriously?" Kelly asked, getting the Filipino girl to nod. "Huh, neat." Being a member of royalty, Star had never had to deal with such issues her whole life thanks to her status, thus she had never felt this sensation her father described. Not even when Ludo attacked her, as he was more focused on stealing her wand than truly trying to hurt her. "It's true, the only times I ever got that feeling, to be honest, was when we were dealing with Toffee and Meteora," Star admitted quietly, even though no one was really paying attention, even herself. So it came as quite the unwelcome surprise to the princess when this feeling hit her out of the blue, making her stumble slightly before Naruto caught her. "Whoa, easy there, Star-chan. Are you alright?" Naruto asked worriedly. "Huh, yeah, I just tripped," she said quickly, rubbing the back of her neck instinctually as she regained her balance. "I guess I'm just a bit more tired than I thought." "Oh damn it, Star. Why can't you stop being such a nice person for 1 minute and just admit something's wrong?" Marco groaned out while facepalming, the bad feeling he had tripling in strength. Buying her small fib without a second thought, Naruto smiled softly with a nod before grabbing the topmost of the princess's left arms and slinging it over his shoulders. "All the more reason to get home right away then, huh?" "Yeah," Star said with a weak smile while they continued to walk. However, once Naruto looked away, that smile was immediately replaced with a frown as the princess looked around for the source of her sudden unease. She wished she hadn't. "Okay, Jana, stop Ray. Super Mega Taffy Blast." Star cut Marco off mid-sentence as she pointed her wand at the Latino boy, firing a blast of the sticky candy that covered his body from the mouth down. "Okay," Jana drawled out nervously with a sweat drop running down the back of her head as she, Hekapoo, and Kelly watched Marco struggling with his new bindings and Star, who'd started coughing a bit due to her throat still being sore. "I'll just get back to reading then." Several men and women that were walking down the street had stopped in order to stare at her and Naruto as they passed by. Several were simply curious, surprised, or intrigued looking, but just as many if not more of them were glaring at her and Naruto with such strong anger or disgust that it sent chills down her spine. Why are they looking at me like that?" Star asked as she shrank into herself, only to get no response as everyone's attention was absorbed by the screen or book respectively. The only exception was Marco, who was frantically trying to break free of his taffy prison while sending Jana constant glares screaming at her to stop reading. Star cringed slightly as she saw all the hostel before scooching a bit closer to the whiskered blonde, scared at the unexpected amount of hostility she was receiving. "What the fuck is that thing?" And that's when the whispers reached her ears. "Must be some freak made by Orochimaru. Disgusting thing. Why are the ninja not killing it? First the Kyuubi brat, then the snake whore, and now this monstrosity. I'm moving out of this village first thing tomorrow. What a horrible creature, fucking freak show, what is it doing in our village? Don't go near it, dear, it's probably dangerous." Dead silence filled the room, with even Marco stopping his struggles as the harsh whispers filled the room. So caught up in their shock of what they were hearing, however, none of them realized that Jana had stopped reading, the book itself having slipped from her grasp and hit the floor, and the screen was just playing by itself like a movie. Star recoiled as her enhanced hearing picked up every little whisper, each word feeling like a knife stabbing into her heart over and over again. "Star-chan. What's wrong?" Naruto asked as he felt the transformed princess tighten her grip around him and start shivering violently. Star didn't say anything, opting to simply hug the whiskered blonde with an iron grip as she quickened her pace. Star was doing pretty much the same as her counterpart, only with the addition that she cringed each time another cruel insult reached her ears. Great, like we don't have enough freaks already. Look at that girl, she's so creepy looking. No wonder she hangs out with the Kyuubi brat, such an ugly thing. Look at that monster. Star walked even faster as dozens upon dozens of harsh insults washed over her, each one crueler than the last. She tried to ignore them, tried to just keep moving, but the cruel words just kept worming their way into her ears. Snapping out of his stunned stupor upon hearing a sniffling sound, Marco's gaze jerked over to the side and saw Star trembling wildly with watering eyes, which made him renew his struggling attempts. Freak, thing, ugly beast. Why are they calling me that? Why are they so angry? Did I do something wrong? The princess wondered with slightly watering eyes. She didn't understand. After the last time she went into her puberty form, everyone had told her that it was rather cute, even with the whole her going boy crazy. So why were these people talking about her so horribly? The same exact thoughts were passing through Star's mind as she watched the scene unfold before her in shock and confusion, simply unable to process the sudden flood of negativity. Nasty thing. Disgusting abomination. Monster. 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 Star-chan. Star jumped in shock at the sudden call, before blinking in confusion when she found herself sitting on her new bed with Naruto sitting next to her with a worried expression. Everyone jumped in their seats at the sudden shout, breaking the rest of the group back to reality. Snap. Finally. And not a moment too soon either, as Marco finally broke free of his makeshift bindings. Picking up the book off the floor, the Latino boy snapped his arm back and hurled it away with all of his might before tossing a blanket over the projector, thus cutting off the video. All right, I've had enough of this. Star, we're going now. Not waiting for a response, Marco grabbed the princess's arm and pulled her to her feet while pulling out his dimensional scissors. However, just before he could cut open a portal leading back to Muni, the sound of breaking glass echoed in the distance, followed by a loud blaring alarm coming from all directions. Oh, now you done it. Hekapoo groaned with a facepalm as everyone else was looking around in surprise and confusion. Warning. Property damage detected. A booming male voice echoed out, causing everyone to cover their ears from the volume. Librarian has been notified. All outgoing dimensional travel is now blocked until further notice. What was that? Jana asked loudly while wiggling a pinky in her ear to try and make the ringing she was hearing to stop. Security system. Hekapoo yelled back, annoyance clear in her tone. It puts the whole place under lockdown whenever someone breaks or tries to steal something. Wait, so we're stuck in here now? Marco demanded while trying to use his scissors, only for them to do nothing at all whenever he cut the air. Yep, only the librarian can lower the security system, the dimensional enforcer said, her voice returning to normal as she spoke. And just so you know, today's their day off, so you'd best get comfortable. Oh, you have got to be kidding me. The hooded teen groaned while flopping back down in his seat. Sorry Marco, I'm dead serious and you got no one but yourself to blame. Hekapoo stated with a shrug. Sighing, the Latino boy nodded before sitting up a bit. Well, at least that stupid book is gone. Marco, Kelly mumbled, getting the boy's attention before she pointed to his side, prompting him to look over and see a somewhat calmed down Star with said book in her hands, flipping back to where they'd left off. I give up. Marco grunted out after a few moments, sinking back into his chair with a defeated air around him while Hekapoo idly pulled the sheet off the projector. He knew Star well enough to know that trying to get her to stop now was a lost cause. Wah! When did we? How? She muttered as she started to get up, only for the whiskered blonde to push her back down. Hey, easy there Star-chan, easy, Naruto said while letting go of Star and cupping her cheeks, which were soaked with tears. What's wrong? You zoned out there for a bit. Is your stomach hurting again? Should we go back to the woe? The blonde was cut off mid-sentence when the princess grabbed him with all 6 arms and pulled him into a hug while burying head into the crook of his neck. Now thoroughly confused at what was going on, Naruto started to reach up to pull Star off him but stopped when he felt the sobs rocking through her body. They kept calling me monster. An ugly freak. A horrible abomination. Over and over and over. Star mumbled as she cried into Naruto's jacket. Why did they keep calling me a monster, Naruto? Why? "'Cause they're a bunch of judgmental pricks," Jana grumbled sourly, with Hekapoo and Kelly nodding in agreement as the trio scowled. Meanwhile, Marco scooted over and gently wrapped an arm around Star's shoulders, trying to comfort the girl as she read. Eyes widening in realization, Naruto swore mentally as he hugged Star with one arm and gently rubbed her head with the other. "Kami, damn it. I am a baka. I am such a stupid baka." Of course, many of the villagers wouldn't take Star's new appearance well, especially since he had been right next to her the whole time. He felt like such a moron for not realizing such a thing earlier, and now because of his blunder, Star had to go through almost half the village while being heckled ruthlessly. How did he not notice any of that? It wasn't like they were being discreet or something, Kelly muttered with a weak glare directed towards the whiskered blonde. "Because he's too used to it to notice anymore," Hekapoo stated sympathetically, getting the greenette's attention. "Do remember that if his profile was anything to go by, then what we just saw is pretty much what he's had to deal with every day of his life. He's likely heard that sort of stuff so many times by now that he tunes it out automatically, just the usual background noise for him, you could say." "Oh, right," Kelly mumbled with a wince at forgetting that. Unfortunately, he had absolutely no idea how to console the crying girl, given his own lack of emotional support when growing up. All Naruto could think of was to hold Star close and gently stroke her head in what he hoped was a soothing manner after creating a clone to get the first person he could think of who could help right now. "Don't listen to what those bakas said, Star-chan. They're nothing but a bunch of jerks who like to be mean." "Too true. I could write a whole book on all the different jerks I've met just like that," Jana said with a nod. While his words were spoken unsurely, they appeared to work somewhat as Star's sobbing eased up just a little bit and she managed to peek up at him with a bloodshot eye. "Why? I honestly don't know, maybe they like being mean," Naruto muttered with a shrug, gaining a bit more confidence as he continued to pet the girl's head. "Or perhaps they're just jealous about how cute you are right now." "Hey, not bad, the kid's a natural," Hekapoo thought, a small smile on her face as she watched both versions of Star gradually settling down thanks to the whiskered blonde's words. Her crying stopping almost altogether now, Star sniffled softly as she raised her head the rest of the way, leaving several thin purple webbing-like strands stretching from her nose to Naruto's shoulder. You think I'm cute?" she asked, hiccuping slightly as she spoke. "Are you kidding? You're absolutely adorable," Naruto said with an honest grin while cupping the girl's cheek. "And anyone who tells you otherwise is a big fat lying teme." "Couldn't put it better myself," Marco said while ruffling the top of Star's head, getting the princess to giggle briefly with an appreciative smile before continuing to read. Unable to help herself, Star smiled briefly in return before burying her head in the crook of his neck once more while Naruto went back to rubbing her head, only now her previous crying was replaced with the occasional sniffle. They stayed like that for a long time, no more words spoken as the whiskered blonde comforted the otherworldly princess as best he could. It was to this sight that Naruto's clone was greeted with when he finally returned with Ino in tow. "Oh geez, I was really hoping you were exaggerating," the gossip queen muttered to the clone as they slowly walked up to the pair sitting on the bed. "Me too, Ino, me too," the clone said before dispersing. End chapter. "Man, talk about intense," Jana said with a sigh as the screen blacked out with the usual ending sign. "Understatement of the freaking century," Kelly muttered while sinking into her hair until only her feet and eyes were visible. "I was not expecting something like that to happen at all." "Definitely a big plot twist," Hekapoo said, nodding in agreement before portaling the book from Star's grasp and flipping through to the profile section. "Now let's see who this Danzo fellow really is." End chapter. "Wow, just wow," Jana deadpanned as she read the profile, which included a list of all the man's current, though a lot of it was blacked out for some reason. Talk about taking being a total jackass to the next level. "He makes Toffee look like an angry candy-stealing toddler," Marco muttered with an absolutely disgusted expression which Kelly, Hekapoo, and Star shared, the latter of which covered her mouth as her cheek marks turned into biohazard signs at the thought of this guy being interested in her in any capacity. "If I ever meet that man I am going to eviscerate and incinerate him at the same time, slowly," Hekapoo muttered darkly as she looked at the extensive list of atrocities the man had committed, many of which even she hadn't thought possible for any sentient creature to willingly commit to their own kind. "All right, that's enough of that," Kelly said queasily, her voice a bit shaky as her face gradually started to turn the same color as her hair, while snatching the book from. In a blink the greenette flipped the pages back to where they'd left off and quickly started to read. "Thanks for this, Ino," Naruto said quietly as he and Ino watched a somewhat recovered Star enjoying a bowl of rainbow sherbet as she giggled at a comedy movie he'd put on for her, Gary the Label Guy. "I'll pay you back as soon as I can, I promise." "Ice cream and binge watching, the best coping method," Jana said, giggling lightly as the mood in the room lightened up a bit upon the scene appearing from the projector. "I wouldn't say best, but it works," Marco muttered before glancing at the Filipino girl. "Reminds me of when we were 7, you got super upset that they canceled the sequel to your favorite video game. You spent 3 days on my couch eating nothing but Rocky Road while watching reruns of Dr. What?" Sighing nostalgically while resting her cheek on her fist, Jana nodded as a small smile formed on her lips. "Oh yeah, I still say Rise of the Vampire 2. Blood Awakening would have been an awesome game." As the duo chattered about old childhood memories, neither of them noticed as Star started to relax, the princess's expression becoming more positive as she giggled at their antics and her cheek marks returning to their normal heart shape. "Don't worry about it, Naruto, this is my treat," Ino said with a wave of her hand while she served herself and her fellow blonde some mint chocolate chip. "And by me I mean my mom. Thank Cammy, she showed me where the emergency, emotional breakdown, scroll was before she left." Being a clan that specialized with the human mind, and more than a few being outright psychologists, almost every single Yamanaka had such a scroll somewhere in their homes or on their person. Said scrolls consisted of just about everything someone might need to give someone emotional support, from comfort foods such as ice cream and sweets to stuffed animals and soothing incense. "Hey, that sounds like something you'd have, Marco," Star said with a giggle as she nudged her friend's side, before pausing mid-joke when said boy coughed awkwardly with a sheepish expression. Grinning teasingly, Hekapoo gently elbowed the young man's other side. "You actually have something like that, don't you?" "Well, you know how I like to be prepared," Marco mumbled as he scratched the back of his head, earning a round of giggles from the girls. "Once a safe boy, always a safe boy," Jana stated with an amused shake of her head. "I wasn't talking about the ice cream," Naruto stated as he accepted the bowl Ino offered him. "Thanks for dropping whatever you were doing to help Star-chan, she really needed it." "Again, don't mention it, I'm just glad to help out a friend," Ino said, patting the whiskered blonde's shoulder comfortingly with a smile. "Besides, you look to be doing just fine cheering her up by yourself." "I'll say, Whiskers is a natural," Hekapoo said in agreement with the blonde mind reader while the others in the room nodded, especially Star, whose smile softened as she remembered how the boy comforted her other self. However, instead of smiling back, Naruto sighed with a deep frown as he slowly took a bite of his minty dessert. "Yeah right, it's my fault that she got so upset in the first place." And just like that, the smile was replaced with a small frown when the princess heard her fellow blonde say that. "Oh please, so a bunch of idiots decided they wanted to be pricks. How could that possibly be your fault?" Ino asked. "Because I should have known that it would happen. Cammy knows I have to deal with people's kuso enough to know how bad they can be." Naruto grumbled bitterly, earning a raised brow from his fellow blonde. "No, don't blame yourself, it wasn't your fault," Star thought as her frown deepened, not liking how such a nice guy was beating himself up because of something out of his control. "Aren't you being a bit overdramatic, Naruto? So people ragged on you a bit for being a baka and those stupid pranks of yours. It can't be that bad," Ino said with a frown of her own. "If only that was the problem," Naruto muttered under his breath almost too quietly to hear, almost. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ino demanded, her brow rising even higher at the whiskered blonde's remark. "You don't want to know," all of the readers said at the same time, even though they knew she couldn't hear them. "Nothing, it's nothing," Naruto said quickly while mentally swearing for thinking aloud. "Look, forget I said anything." Before Ino could say anything in response, Naruto walked away and sat down next to Star, who immediately wrapped two of her left arms around his waist and pulled him close as they watched the show. "That was a terrible move, all he's doing is making her want to dig even deeper," Marco said bluntly with a facepalm. "And she is not gonna like what she unearths whatsoever," Hekapoo said as everyone else nodded in agreement. "That didn't sound like nothing. The damage was already done though," The blonde had poked the sleeping beast and caused it to stir as Ino stared at him with a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and suspicion. "What are you hiding, Naruto?" Whatever it was, the idea of her finding out scared the hell out of Naruto if the way his voice had hitched meant anything, and that in itself was surprising as she had never seen him freaked out like that. Yeah, from a kid who willingly sliced his own hand open without flinching just to prove a point, I'd say seeing him scared of something would be pretty interesting for me too, Jana admitted, given her love of snooping and gossip, before suddenly adopting a thoughtful expression. Wait, why is he scared? He's disliked because of a stupid stigma about when he was born, right? So wouldn't it make more sense to be really pissed off or super depressed? That, Marco started to say something, only to immediately pause as an identical look appeared on his face. Is actually a good question. Meh, he's probably just worried about being rejected or something, Hekapoo said after a moment of silence as everyone contemplated the hatted girl's inquiry. Or maybe we don't quite know the full story yet, which we will once somebody starts reading again. Getting the not-so-subtle hint, Kelly flipped the page and kept reading. Though given what I've learned since yesterday, that's not really surprising, huh? Ino thought as she took her spot in the unoccupied recliner. If someone had told her 2 days ago that she'd be hanging out in Naruto's apartment, eating ice cream while helping him comfort his roommate, she would have laughed her ass off before punching them in the face. Yet here she was, in that exact situation, while having her whole perspective of Naruto shredded to pieces like paper in a blender. Ah, the whole "never thought in a million years" cliché, Jana muttered while nodding her head slowly. It strikes when you least expect it, and almost always comes with an amusing irony. Especially when somebody is so adamant that they'll never ever do it. Hekapoo added with a wistful chuckle which the Filipino girl shared. Where she had once seen nothing but an annoying loudmouthed idiot, she now found a complex puzzle of confounding enigmas that only grew more confusing the deeper she dug into it. In fact, there were 2 questions in particular that have been nagging at her for a while now, even before all this craziness happened, and now was good as any time to get answers. "Hey Naruto," Ino called out, causing her fellow blonde and Star to look towards her, the former with a look screaming. "Don't push it, I've been wondering. How did you become a genin? And when did you get so good with clones? You couldn't even make a single one back in the academy." "I have been wondering that a bit," Marco said curiously, since the story kept referencing that the blonde had to learn the technique but not how or when. "Oh, that," Naruto said with a slightly relieved look on his face while Star looked towards him curiously. "Well, you remember Iruka-sensei's assistant? Mizuki-sensei." "Yeah. Why? What's he got to do with anything?" Ino asked, her brow rising once more. 2 pictures of Mizuki popped up on screen, the first from when he was teaching with Iruka, if the chalkboard in the background was to go by, and the second being him perched in a tree with a giant shuriken. He was a plain-ish man, a bit on the thin side with bluish-white hair and wearing generic-looking clothing. However, the most noticeable thing about both pictures was the man's expression, with him looking calm and friendly in the former. His true colors are shown in the second as he snarls with an angry, slightly deranged glare. "Talk about a sneaky little creep," Hekapoo muttered with a distasteful hiss. Jana and Marco nodding in agreement while Star and Kelly reflexively reached for their wand and sword respectfully. "Everything," Naruto replied with grit teeth, making the gossip queen blink in surprise. "Turns out that Teme was a traitor and tried to use me to steal from the village." "Really? Huh, that explains why he was missing when we were assigned teams. What happened exactly?" Ino asked eagerly, her inner gossiper already hooked while Star simply listened with a curious look. "He found me after I failed graduation, and tricked me with a fake remake test," Naruto explained, frowning as he remembered how Mizuki duped him. "Told me if I stole a certain scroll from the Hokage vault and learned a single technique from it then I'd pass." "I get it," Jana said while rubbing her chin. "Dupe an unknowing accomplice into doing the dirty work so that if the plan fails they take the fall, and if it works they still take the fall or at least end up stalling out the security until you can make your escape. A simple yet effective plan. You should know, you did the same thing with the popular kids during the Halloween party when we were in middle school." Marco stated dully, getting the Filipino girl to shrug with a smirk whilst the rest of the group looked at them curiously. "Ah man, I remember that, it had to be the greatest Halloween ever. You tricked them into spiking the punch, with a cocktail of diuretics, laxatives, and ipecac that they thought was vodka, and recorded the whole thing as it went down." Again, best Halloween ever. You broke into the Hokage vault. So that's why the village went into a huge panic that day. Ino exclaimed with widened eyes before blinking and giving Naruto a critical look. Wait, how the hell did you manage that? You'd have had to get past the Hokage himself. Honestly, that was the easy part. I just used my Oiroke no Jutsu and Gigi was out light. Naruto said with a shrug, earning a deadpan from Ino. The Oiroke what now? Star and Kelly asked in sync, the latter reading the sentence over as she tried to figure out how to pronounce the odd words. Oiroke no Jutsu, which roughly translates to sexy technique. Marco finished with a raised brow, a question mark seemingly blinking over his head. So what, he flashes his junk at people? Hekapoo asked bluntly before busting out in laughter at the blushes that erupted on Kelly and Star's face, barely even caring as Marco drenched her with the spray bottle. Nah, then it be called the flasher technique, Jana added, throwing more fuel to the metaphoric fire. I bet he dresses in drag or something. Bawahahahaha. That would be so stumping hilarious. The dimensional enforcer barely managed to cough out between fits of giggles. Seriously? That stupid technique actually worked on him? Ino asked dully, her deadpan expression deepening when Naruto nodded without hesitation. What exactly does this Arcojutsu thing do? Star asked with a confused tilt of her head. Instead of answering verbally, Naruto brought his hands up in a ram sign before being engulfed in a plume of smoke. Once it cleared, Star's cheeks literally glowed pink from surprised embarrassment when she found herself hugging a buck-naked, pigtailed, and well-endowed female Naruto. I'll admit, him actually turning into a girl, did not see that one coming, Jana stated, breaking the silence that filled the area as she and everyone else stared at the projection with bugged-out eyes. Me either, Hekapoo agreed with a slow nod, before noticing something in the corner of her eye that caused her grin to quickly return. Though I cannot deny its results. Following the fire woman's gaze, Jana almost immediately started cracking up upon seeing the stunned look on Marco's face, his face practically melting from how red it was, while a small dribble of blood oozed from his nose. That's so cool, Star exclaimed, snapping Marco and Kelly from their dazed states as she clapped her hands with sparkling eyes. It is kinda neat, Kelly agreed with a nod, though a frown creased her lips as she spoke. But does he really have to be naked? That's kinda over the top if you ask me. Well, it's his, her, there, huh, do we still call him a him or a her now? Jana wondered while tapping her chin thoughtfully, before quickly shrugging off the thought. Anyway, as I was saying, his body his choice. He wants to go flashing it around, then that's his decision. You would say that? Marco said dully while quickly wiping away the small trail of blood from his face. Tada. Behold my personal anti-pervert technique. The transformed blonde said in a sultry feminine voice while doing a few sexy poses before throwing Ino a dirty look. And if it's so stupid Ino, why do people keep falling for it? Ino opened her mouth to retort, only for no words to come out when she failed to think of a valid argument. As much as she hated to admit it, he was right. The Oiroke no Jutsu did have a high success rate whenever she'd seen him use it in class. So she settled for sticking her nose into the air with an indignant huff. Can't argue with the results. Hekapoo said between giggles as a brief montage of Naruto using the sexy jutsu against various people played out, including Iruka and Hiruzen. Nope, no you cannot. Jana agreed somewhat breathlessly as her own laughter winded down. Meanwhile, Star had recovered from her surprise as her cheek marks turned into sparkles. You can turn into a girl. That is so cool, she exclaimed with a wide smile, unconsciously floating into the air as her wings fluttered with excitement while she let go of Naruto and looked her over. Hey, it's like looking at a mirror. Marco thought while glancing back at the real Star, who was literally vibrating in her seat from excitement still. Don't get too excited Star, it's just a basic henge, Ino said with a good-natured roll of her eyes before reaching out towards her fellow blonde's bust, with her pointer finger. Watch. Just one little poke and, eep. Ino stopped mid-sentence when instead of the transformation dispelling like she expected, her finger squished into the fleshy lobe while Naruto squeaked and instinctually covered her chest. Okay, so maybe you're better at it than I thought, Ino said with a light blush as she retracted her hand. So, you stole something from the vault? Bawahahaha. Oh man. This just keeps getting funnier and funnier every second, Hekapoo roared out as she and Jana burst back into uncontrollable fits of laughter. Thankful for the change of subject, Naruto nodded quickly while allowing the jutsu to dispel in another puff of smoke. Yeah, a really big scroll called the Fuin no Sho, which is where I learned the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. That's a big scroll. Star couldn't help but say as a picture of Naruto holding said scroll popped up, showing that it was at least half as big as he is. No kidding, but I can see why that Mizuki guy wanted it so bad, Kelly said as she read a context box at the upper corner of the page. Apparently that thing contains several of Naruto's home's most powerful and dangerous techniques, though most of them are practically guaranteed to kill you if you aren't careful. Makes sense. People just love hiding important things in weird and obviously overcompensating ways, Jana stated as she wiped a tear from her eye. Ah, so it was a different Bunshin than the one taught at the academy, Ino said, having not been entirely sure until now. Any chance you'd be willing to teach me how to use it? Sorry Ino, but Gigi made me promise not to, said it was too dangerous because of extreme chakra eating or some technical jargon like that. I kinda zoned out halfway through his explanation, Naruto admitted while rubbing the back of his head sheepishly. I'm pretty sure you mean intense chakra consumption, and come on, it can't be that bad, you've been using it pretty willy-nilly, Ino pointed out with a frown. She has a point, he does use it pretty much all the time, Star said with a nod, before tilting her head as she scratched her head thoughtfully. But didn't the book say Naruto has an abnormally big chakra puddle or something as well? Chakra pool, Star, and yes it did, Marco corrected and answered. He's most likely an exception to the rule because he has all that extra energy to negate the normal consequences. Huh? The princess asked with a raised brow, making the Latino boy sigh exasperatedly. He has a bunch of extra power which lets him use it so carelessly. Oh, okay, got it. Even so, I promised that I wouldn't, so I won't. If you really want to learn it, then take it up with Gigi, Naruto stated firmly, making Ino nod in understanding. Anyway, I used that jutsu to kick Mizuki's ass in 1,000 ways at once after Iruka found me and revealed that the whole thing was a scam. Afterwards, Iruka was so impressed with how well I did that he considered it good enough for me to pass for real. As he spoke, a soft smile crossed Naruto's lips while he reached up and rubbed the side of his headband. He even gave me his own Hite 8 as graduation gift. Ah, that's so sweet. Star gushed as she fluttered back into her seat and started eating her sherbet again. A clip of said scene played on screen, complete with audio. Ah, it really is sweet, that Iruka guy is acting just like a big bro for Naruto, Star said with a soft squeal as she clapped her hands together. I give it a 7 out of 10, it was nice but probably been better if we saw the whole thing go down, Hekapoo said while making a so-so motion with her hand. And pretty ironic when you think about it, Ino said as she smirked. Mizuki gives you a fake test and it ends up turning into a real one that you passed. I like the way she thinks, Jana said with an approving nod while everyone else chuckled and or agreed with the mind reader. Huh, when you put it like that, it is actually pretty funny, Naruto said with a chuckle while Star giggled. But that's basically how it went. I got duped, learned an awesome jutsu, kicked ass, and became a real ninja. All in a night's work you could say. With his story finished, the trio settled down in their spots and continued to enjoy their movie and ice cream, or at least that was how it appeared. While Star and Naruto were actually watching the video playing, Ino was merely staring at the screen without actually seeing as she tried to solve the newly discovered mystery that was her fellow blonde. Damn it, I got nothing still, Ino mentally groaned as she failed to figure out what Naruto had been muttering to himself about. Nothing she knew about the whiskered boy could explain his reaction, or what could possibly have spooked him so badly. Looks like I'll need to dig up some more dirt if I want to figure this out. She'd let this matter drop for now, but rest assured, she would figure out what he was hiding one way or another. Her pride as a gossiper demanded it. I don't think she'll like what she finds, Kelly said, the good mood in the room dying down a bit as everyone was reminded of the whiskered blonde's not-too-happy past. Speaking of resting, as Ino finally snapped out of her thoughts and returned her focus to the real world, the platinum blonde blinked in surprise when she found Star and Naruto passed out on the recliner-turned love seat. The transformed princess's head sat on the whiskered blonde's shoulder, 4 of her arms wrapped haphazardly around his body while the remaining 2 clung to her wand and now empty bowl. As soon as that scene came up on screen, 2 things happened. 1. Star's cheek marks went supernova from how hard she was blushing, and 2. Janna and Hekapoo grinned mischievously as they quickly moved to either side of the princess. "Ah, look at the Whittle Lovebirds snuggle," the Dimensional Enforcer said teasingly, nudging the blushing girl's side as she babbled incoherently. "So how long till the first date?" "I think I can hear the wedding bells already. Dibs on being one of the bridesmaids," the hatted Filipino girl added, making Star stutter even more as she waved her hands around wildly in denial. "Oh, and on being godmother. Super mega sticky taffy blast." Unable to take any more, Star sprung away from the teasing duo and fired a large of gooey candy from her wand that engulfed them completely. Landing beside Marco, the princess's breathing was ragged as the blush on her cheeks slowly started to *SSSS's crackle, and they should totally have the wedding at a beach. The castle theme is so cliché and overused, Hekapoo said as the taffy around her and Janna shattered to pieces after the fire user roasted it rock solid. "Come on you two, stop it," Marco said, before spritzing both of them in the face with the spray bottle when they kept making joking remarks about weddings and dating. However, while Hekapoo simply grunted in annoyance from the spray, Janna flinched with a yelp, a hand shooting up to cover her face as she blinked rapidly. "Gah! It burns." "What the hell? Why does it burn?" "What? You didn't really think I had just water in this, did you?" Marco asked with a quirked brow as his friend quickly wiped her face with her shirt. "Then what the hell is in that mace?" the Filipino girl demanded as she focused a mild glare on the red hood-wearing teen, her eyes scrunched up and slightly bloodshot. "Mouthwash actually," the Latino boy stated with a grin. "Makes you stop and washes your mouth out at the same time." "Dang, that's actually a good one. Oh Cammy, that is adorable," Ino thought with a quiet squeal before pulling out a camera from somewhere as she stood up and quickly took several pictures. Hello future teasing material. After collecting a sufficient amount of evidence to the scene and finally noticing how late it had gotten, she quickly put the camera away and shook the pair's shoulders to wake them. "Ooh, that's not gonna end well," Marco muttered with a wince, earning confused looks from everyone else in the room aside from Star, who was nodding in agreement, until he explained further. "Star tends to react aggressively in her sleep when anything or anyone bothers her. We learned that the hard way during her second week on Earth. When Princess Smooshy tried to switch places with me so she could avoid going back to St. Olga's," the princess said, giggling a bit as she remembered that little misadventure. "You were convinced that I had some weird mind problem or something until Smooshy revealed herself. And I still can't believe she actually thought we looked alike." "I'm guessing she didn't?" Kelly asked curiously, to which Marco responded by pulling out his phone and after a fiddling with it a bit flipped it over to show a picture of a weird elephant-looking person wearing a tiara in a classic selfie pose. "Okay, either she needs glasses or her head checked, possibly both." However, Naruto's head just rolled to the side as drool oozed from the side of his mouth while Star simply grumbled quietly and swatted at Ino with her bowl-wielding hand. Dodging the blind swings with ease, Ino frowned slightly before nudging the purple princess once more. "Star, it's time for bed." "Meh, go eat." Star mumbled while swinging her arm again, accidentally hurling the bowl across the room when it slipped from her fingers and narrowly missed Ino's head. Eyebrow twitching now, Ino was so close to just calling it quits and leaving the duo as they were, but after taking a deep breath to calm down decided to give it one more try. Reaching down, she grabbed 2 of Star's arms and pried them off Naruto. "Come on Star, up and at whoosh *ga." Ino yelped in surprise as she suddenly found herself blasted up to the ceiling by blobs of purple silk that shot from Star's palms. Stunned from the unexpected flight and impact, the gossiper was unable to react as the transformed princess shot several more streams of the sticky substance at her, cocooning the blonde from top to bottom until only her eyes and nose were left visible. "Bawahahaha. I see what you mean now, ha 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 ha." Hekapoo barely managed to giggle out as she and everyone else burst into laughter upon seeing the mind-reading blonde get cocooned. "MPH, MMMPH, MMPH, MPH, Ino's muffled yells rang out as she struggled against her bindings. However, the silky material proved too elastic for her to break through and cutting it was not an option since she'd left her kunai pouch at home. "That stuff is pretty tough all right," Marco agreed once he settled down, turning towards Star as he spoke. I remember you ripping apart lockers and such with ease using that stuff. Nodding in agreement, Star couldn't help but smile sheepishly as she remembered the aftermath of her puberty. I'm just glad nobody was too mad at me for cocooning them up during all that. After several more minutes of futile attempts to break free, the trapped blonde eventually admitted defeat, sweat pouring from her brow. Staring at Star with a deadpan expression, Ino tried to get the half-awake girl's attention, only to end up rolling her eyes when she snuggled back up with Naruto with a quiet snore. Kuso. Looks like I'm stuck like this for a while. I should have stopped when she threw the bowl at me. Ino thought with a muffled groan. Oh well, might as well catch a few Z's while I wait for those two to wake up and get me out. With her action, or in this case inaction, decided, Ino squirmed around in her cocoon, getting as comfortable as she could in her silken prison before closing her eyes as she allowed herself to doze off. Just missing as Star started to shake and whimper in her sleep. And just like that, the good mood was suddenly gone as everyone focused in on the twitching transformed princess, concern clear on their faces. What the, how did I get here? Star muttered in surprise as she found herself standing in the middle of Konoha all alone. Understandably puzzled and no small bit nervous, the purple princess hugged herself as she walked down the empty street. Naruto? Ino? Hello? She called out, cupping her top hands around her mouth to make herself louder. Hello? Where are you guys? Look at that freak walking around here like it's one of us. Star flinched as soon as those words were spoken, shrinking into her seat with a soft whimper. As this happened, Kelly pulled the princess into a comforting hug, her long green locks falling over them both until only their eyes were left visible. Oh, just fantastic, it just had to show her nightmares as well. Marco thought sarcastically with a sigh while idly catching the book that shot out from the mass of hair next to him, having had a strong feeling something like this would happen sooner or later. Star stopped mid-step as these words reached her ears, before jerking her head towards the direction it came from. Only to find no one there. Confused, the multi-armed girl looked around for any sign of the person who'd been speaking, but not a soul was to be seen. It's so disgusting, we should just get rid of it already. A different voice said from behind Star, making her spin around while drawing her wand. Who's there? She demanded, pointing her now glowing wand around threateningly, yet was once again greeted with nothing but emptiness. Why is that monster still here? I thought someone would have killed it already. Stop calling me that. I'm not a monster, Star yelled angrily as her eyes started to water. Hearing the muffled sniffling coming from the covered duo, Marco swiftly pulled out a packet of tissue from his pocket before tossing them over, where they were promptly caught midair by one of Star's hands and yoinked into the bundle. Then, a few moments later he held up a small trash can where the now used tissues were disposed of while a soft, "Thanks," emanated from the hair. Yes, you are. Someone whispered right into the princess's ear, causing her to freeze in shock as their hot breath tickled her neck and their hooded face peeked over her shoulder. You're nothing but a horrible, disgusting, worthless monster. Gah! Get away! Star screamed, reflexively jabbing her elbow into the mystery person in the gut, making them gasp for air while she jumped away from them and turning around with her wand raised. Dagger crystal heart attack. With her cry, hundreds of razor-sharp crystal hearts launched from her wand, stabbing into the cloak several times over then webbing them just to be safe. Damn, Star really went for the kill with that one. Jana thought with an approving nod, because anyone who dissed her friends like that deserved an ass whooping, imaginary or not. Steadying herself, the multi-armed girl kept the magical tool at the ready as she glared at the unknown figure, who casually stood up and casually snapped the webs before dusting off the daggers like they were bits of dirt. Who are you? Why do you keep calling me a monster? Because Star. The figure started before reaching up and undoing the clasp holding their hood on, causing Star to gasp in shock as it fell to the ground and she found herself facing herself? Standing before the princess was another star butterfly, but this one had several distinct differences. Wait, what? All the watchers, readers chorused at the same time in surprise before the image on screen changed to show this other star. This star had grayish velvet skin that gave it a decaying look, her hair was a bright ice blue, the fingernails on all 6 hands were sharpened into razor-sharp claws, her wings were obsidian black with several tears and holes in them, her wand was primarily reddish-colored with ragged wings, and her cheek marks and heart-shaped pupils were pitch black and inverted horizontally. Finally, her mouth was revealed to be filled with razor-sharp fangs as the doppelganger gave a toothy smirk. Inside of Kelly's hair, Star felt a strong shiver run down her spine as her doppelganger's gaze seemed to bore straight into her soul, which only grew worse once the dark star finally spoke. "We are a monster." Naruto's apartment star's eyes snapped open as she shot up, her arms flailing around wildly, shooting off multiple salvos of webbing all over. Within seconds, almost the entire apartment was covered in the silky substance, with what was left exposed soon to follow if it wasn't for the pair of arms that suddenly wrapped around her torso. "Whoa! Easy there, Star-chan. Calm down," Naruto exclaimed while pulling the girl onto his lap and held her tightly as she continued to thrash around. "Dang. Whiskers really is tough to be able to hold a puberty-enhanced Muman down by himself like that," Hekapoo stated with a low impressed whistle. "No kidding." Marco agreed while remembering how effortlessly Star had manhandled him during her puberty. "Speaking of Star," said Princess reemerged, wiping her nose with one last tissue as she shuffled back to her spot, quietly muttering a thank you to Kelly which the greenette waved off. After several moments though, his words finally managed to worm themselves into Star's ears and through her brain, causing the transformed princess to snap out of her panic-induced state. "There we go, easy, easy," Naruto said, loosening his grip when the girl stopped squirming and slowly relaxed. Once she was completely settled down, the princess turned around and hugged him tightly that he returned. "Nightmare? Understatement of the year. That was freaky even by my standards," Jana muttered before raising a hand to her chin thoughtfully. "Although, I have to say that nightmare version of Star was actually pretty badass looking. She did look mostly cool, but I'm not a fan of the skin tone, made her look a lot like a walking corpse," Hekapoo added, getting a nod from the Filipino girl. "Good point, the zombie look is so last season anyway." Star mumbled with a nod, her whole body starting to tremble and her breathing grew ragged as her adrenaline rush wore off. It was. "Shish, it was just a dream, whatever happened wasn't real," Naruto said reassuringly while gently rubbing Star's back. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "Ah, Sniff, he's so nice," Star mumbled with a small smile forming on her lips, her mood perking up as she watched Naruto comforting her other self. Nodding, the princess remained silent as she snuggled into Naruto's side for several more minutes before finally letting the whiskered blonde go. "Thanks, Naruto." "Anytime, now come on, up and at 'em," Naruto said while looking around his webbed-up apartment. "We got some cleaning due to." "Hey, yeah, sorry about that," Star said with a small sheepish smile, before blinking when she finally noticed something. "Hey, where's my wand and Ino?" "Well, your wand's over there," Naruto said while pointing to the table where said magical item was webbed down. "And Ino probably went home after we fell asleep." "Nah, she decided to stick around for a bit," Jana punned, earning a few chuckles from Hekapoo, Star, and Kelly whilst Marco just rolled his eyes good-naturedly. MPHM, or she could be glued to the ceiling," Naruto said, sweat dropping as he looked upwards to see Ino staring down at him from her cocoon. "Ino, why are you glued to the ceiling?" Giving Naruto her best. "Really? Look," Ino rolled her eyes while mumbling indistinctly through her bindings. "How much you wanna bet she just said something like, 'What's it look like I'm doing? Enjoy the view?'" Kelly asked as she shook her head humouredly. "That's a sucker's bet," Marco retorted with a chuckle. "Right, sorry, I'll get you down in a second," Naruto said, grabbing a kunai from his pouch and forming a pair of clones, one that boosted him up while the other stood directly underneath Ino with Star. Aiming carefully, the whiskered blonde sank his dagger into the silk and sliced it off the ceiling. Just a little bit further and, there. MMPH, Ino shrieked as her cocoon fell towards the arms of Star and the other clone, who then carefully set her down on the love seat. Once this was done, Naruto dropped down from his clone's shoulders and dispersed his two copies as he knelt beside his fellow blonde. "Alright, now for the tricky part," Naruto muttered while gently patting the side of the cocoon, earning an offended huff from Ino as she gave him a dirty look. "What? I'm making sure none of you is in the way before I start. Would you rather I slice off a piece of you instead?" Grumbling quietly, the girl nodded in understanding and stopped glaring, though she still kept a firm look that screamed, Don't try anything, or else. Sheesh. Paranoid much? Kelly asked rhetorically while shaking her head again, only this time in exasperation. Well, she is trapped in a cocoon with a young man who can clone himself endlessly, Jana said quietly with a teasing smirk, which grew even wider as the greenette's face rapidly grew inflamed. If that's not a recipe for a fun time, I don't know what gaw. The Filipino girl cut herself off as she cried out in pain, falling back into her seat with her hands clasped over her face after Kelly suddenly blasted her right in the eyes with Marco's spray bottle. Blinking in surprise, said safe kid reflexively glanced down at his side where the bottle should have been and then back at where it was in Kelly's grasp. Due to this though, he missed the mischievous grin on Hekapoo's lips as she twiddled a lock of her hair. Lining his kunai up very carefully, Naruto gently stabbed it into the webbing at Ino's shoulder and slowly dragged it downwards. Once he got down to her waist, the platinum blonde's hands burst out before grabbing the newly made tear and pulling it open while the whiskered boy continued to cut. Pa! Freedom at last! Ino exclaimed dramatically as her head popped free of the cocoon. Okay. Now could you explain why you were glued to the ceiling? Naruto asked while he and Star pulled the girl the rest of the way free. Dude. Pretty sure the answer to that is obvious, Marco muttered dully. Star stuck me up there accidentally when I tried to get you two sleepy heads to bed, Ino said grumpily, making the transformed princess smile sheepishly. Sorry, Star muttered with her head bowed. Don't worry about it, like I said it was an accident, Ino said with a wave of her hand as she stretched her stiff muscles and joints before picking up a chunk of the silky material she'd been trapped inside. Besides, I have to admit, other than being a bit stuffy, it was surprisingly comfortable in there. In fact, I was wondering if I could keep some of this stuff. She wants to keep my webbing? Star asked, her brow rising while her head tilted to the side. Why? Probably to stuff her pillow or something. She did say it was comfy, Kelly said with a shrug. Oh, that makes sense. Sure, no problem, I have plenty to go around, Star said, making a ball of the webbing with her topmost hands to emphasize her point. Well, at least until I turn back to normal. Speaking of which, how long do you think until that happens? Ino asked curiously. I was wondering that as well, Marco said as he scratched the back of his head and glanced at the real Star. I mean, you can turn back and forth at will now, so we know that humans can eventually control the transformation, but in that Star's case it wasn't a natural transformation. So will she just turn back to normal automatically, or will she have to will it back manually? That's a good question, Hekapoo said, rubbing her chin thoughtfully before shrugging her shoulders and waving towards the Latino boy. Why don't you keep reading already so we can find out? Honestly, I don't know, Star said with a shrug. The last time I was like this was when I went through puberty, and that only lasted a few hours. Well, don't worry, I'm sure you'll be back to your normal self in no time, Naruto said with a smile before he made several clones that got to work peeling the webbing that covered every surface. Now can we get cleaning already? The landlord is going to have an aneurysm if he sees this mess. Ooh, what's a landlord? Is it some kind of earth royalty, or is it just one of those weird phrases you were teaching me where it's not the literal meaning? Kelly asked Marco curiously as he read. Kinda both in this case, the red hood wearing teen stated. A landlord is someone who owns a property that they allow someone else to live in, mostly apartment buildings like with Naruto. In return, you pay a renting fee and follow the rules they lay down, or they'll evict you and rent it out to someone else. So while they aren't actually royalty, they're the lord of that land in a sense, and you have to follow their laws or leave. Kelly muttered with an understanding nod. All right, but only because I have a bunch of ideas of what to do with this silk afterwards, Ino said before turning back to Star with a curious look as they cleaned up the remains of her cocoon. So what happened when you went through this puberty? It's kinda embarrassing to talk about, Star muttered as her cheek marks glowed pink. Star had the exact same look as her counterpart as she scratched her cheek with a finger while everyone else snickered, giggled, and chuckled at the blonde's embarrassment. Come on, I won't tell anyone, promise. Ino begged with a cute pout. Oh, all right. Well, it all started when, end chapter. That's a weird place to cut off. Marco muttered with a raised brow as the words, end of chapter, appeared on the screen.